The road stretches on forever, and in its shadows, stories are born. Welcome to the Sleep Haunt, where every mile hides something the daylight can't explain. Tonight we bring you 8 true trucker horror stories, real encounters from fog-covered highways, silent fuel stops, and those endless nights where the line between real and unreal begins to fade. Before we start, we've set a goal. Let's reach 100 likes on this video. Tap that like button now and help keep our wheels turning through the dark. If you're new here, subscribe to the Sleep Haunt and join us on every strange mile ahead. Now take a deep breath, settle in, and listen. The highway has a story for you. Story number 1. He ran nights on the prairie because the air was cooler then and the lanes were nearly empty. The rig moved like a quiet ship through a slow ocean of wheat and grass, mile markers slipping past at an even rhythm. He knew this stretch well enough to tell the time by which radio tower blinked red on the horizon. The name on his license said Elias. He carried an easy calm that came from years of driving, from knowing where the wind would push harder, where the curves would hide a patch of black ice, where the deer liked to wait under the glow of the next sign. Past midnight, the sky opened wide and clear. Stars burned in neat, familiar constellations above the long flat. He crossed county lines without thinking about it, just following the thin, steady beam of his headlights and the faint edge of the shoulder reflecting back. It was the kind of night when the road felt sensible, honest. Then a detour sign rose ahead, sudden and crisp. The arrow on it was bright and modern, blinking LED lights that drew the eye and held it. Fresh orange barrels lined a new path that veered gently off the main highway. Detours happen. Bridges get work done. Pavement needs repair. Elias downshifted and followed the barrels onto a 2-lane that probably used to be the route before the interstate took over. The engine hummed evenly. On the CB, a low hiss of static leaned into a voice that didn't make it through, then slipped away again. The new road was smooth, too smooth for its supposed age, and the air carried a faint scent of rain even though the sky showed only stars. There were no other trucks, which was unusual for a detour. No taillights, no oncoming beams. Just the neat procession of orange barrels, and the gently pulsing arrow signs guiding him into the quiet. The wheat on either side shifted in a pattern that repeated itself, one patch leaning, falling still, then leaning again like breath. He noticed it, and then told himself to let the thought pass. 10 minutes in, he rolled past a wooden sign half hidden by creeping vines. Temple Creek, it read. Carved letters. Worn smooth. By time. He felt the small twinge that comes when a name surfaces from nowhere. Temple Creek sounded like a place that should exist. A town with a cafe, a post office, maybe a little hardware store with a bell on the door. He couldn't remember seeing it on the map. Fuel sat just above a quarter tank. It would be enough, but the thought of topping up in a small town had a comforting simplicity to it. If there was a station, he would stop. A minute later, a soft rectangle of light appeared ahead, the kind of glow produced by sodium lamps that turn everything a gentle amber. The sign was old. Hand-painted Temple Creek General. Underneath, groceries, tackle, fuel. Elias pulled alongside the pump. It was one of the older kinds, the numbers on small rolling wheels behind glass. He stepped out, and the night met him with a still, mild kind of cool. A bell chimed when he lifted the nozzle. Not a tinny electric ding, but a real bell from somewhere behind the glass. The numbers rolled up slowly. Steady. Inside, a person stood at the counter, back turned, shoulders slightly hunched in a flannel shirt. Beyond that figure, rows of shelves, a small TV on mute, a jar of beef jerky sticks, postcards of a river, and a little white church. He finished pumping, replaced the nozzle, and the bell chimed again with that oddly soothing sound. He stepped inside, the door's hinge giving a tired sigh. The person at the counter didn't turn around. The shoulders shifted, as if adjusting a weight. The TV showed a game from no league he knew. Players in old uniforms moving too quickly and then too slowly, like the film was skipping frames. Elias placed a 20 on the counter, waited a polite moment, then gently slid the bill under a small rock that seemed meant for that purpose. A pencil rested beside a receipt pad. He wrote the amount, truck number, and the time. His pen made a neat line of blue ink. Outside, the night felt new again. He climbed in, turned the key, watched the dash lights glow in order: oil, battery, brake, all fine, and pulled out. The detour continued, barrels leading the way like quiet ushers. He drove another 10 minutes. The road offered a tight curve around a small stand of cottonwoods and then stretched perfectly straight. He passed a billboard for a winter festival in a town called Bardwell Sledding. Hot cider, live music. He didn't know Bardwell, but the design looked charming and a little old-fashioned. He smiled at it and carried on. After the straightaway came a little rise and a railroad crossing with no gate, just the crossbuck sign and a pair of lights. The red lights were not flashing. The tracks were clean and gleaming, and he eased over them with care, even though there was no sign of a train. The highway rose ahead. He recognized a faint gypsum smell that sometimes pressed in on windless nights. The road offered a second tight curve around cottonwoods, and it was as familiar as the first, which made him realize he was seeing the same stand. The same billboard arrived after it. Bardwell, sledding, and cider. It wasn't déjà vu. It was the same markers. His foot didn't press any harder. But the feeling of things gently sliding out of place brought a soft heat to his palms. He checked the clock, 1:17 a.m. It had been 1:17 a.m. Last time he noticed the clock, too. He told himself he'd looked too soon, misremembered. He told himself things that made sense and felt like they fit, even if the corner pieces didn't line up quite right. The railroad crossing looked identical. The red lights were dark. He rolled over the tracks and on. The map on his dash had lost its blue line. The satellite icon spun, and then went quiet. In the mirror, the amber hue of the store's light was gone, no trace of it back down the two-lane. The CB hissed again, then formed a word and broke it apart into letters, temp, tem, t, then white noise that shivered and drifted. After another careful curve, the Bardwell billboard rose from the roadside again. Same edges, same small tear in the corner, the same snow catching a child's boots. This time he looked around deliberately, slow. The wheat breathed its pattern, left then, still then, left again. He eased onto the shoulder and stopped. There was a pull-off up ahead, a gravel maintenance cut where the grass had been worn to stubble by county trucks. He nosed into it and shut off his lights, then the engine. The night pressed close and gentle. Crickets sounded near the ditch, far away. A coyote treaty call rose and fell like a memory. From where he sat in the unlit cab, the barrels on the roadway looked slightly different. In the dark, their reflectors didn't quite answer his presence. Wind nuzzled them and they shifted in unison, not independent but together, like a school of fish turning on a cue. He waited. Minutes passed, or he thought they were minutes. The clock's light was a muted orange, and it didn't change. He pressed the button to see if the seconds would show. They did not. He touched the wheel and felt it cool beneath his hands. A sound came then, a very faint murmur of a crowd, as if coming up from beneath the ground. Not in a frightening way, but like the distant hum of an event in a town square a long time ago. A parade? A harvest? He leaned back and kept breathing even. The barrels seemed to draw a shape that wasn't a road at all but a loop, a slow circle meant to keep travelers moving in place, always seeing cottonwoods and crossing tracks, and winter festivals promised on repeat. When he turned the key again and brought the engine to life, he felt a surety settle over him that came from years of steady decisions. He rolled forward, back to the shoulder, and into the lane. At the fork where the barrels insisted left, he took the right, onto the black seam that showed like a ghost through their tidy arrangement. The reflectors didn't flash a protest. The wind kept nuzzling. The rig moved like a careful animal, cautious but convinced. The two-lane narrowed into concrete that felt older, the surface speaking to his tires in a different voice. The night around him warmed by a degree, the scent of alfalfa rising like a memory. The detour quieted behind him, not offended but done with him, as if it had tested his willingness to follow and found it lacking or admirable. He couldn't tell which. Mile markers appeared again, small green hints. 208, 207, 206. His clock ticked over to 1:18 a.m. He exhaled a breath he didn't know he was holding. By the time the first color raised the eastern sky, he rejoined the interstate as if he'd never left. No cones, no barrels, no blinking arrows in the modern style. A state sign announced road work starting next week. He took the first way station that had an open sign. The person behind the glass passed him a form and stamped it with a neat, firm motion. The stamp had a small error in the town's name, Bardwell, without the second L. He noticed and then didn't say anything, signing where the line asked. On his break at a rest area, he dug for the receipt from the Temple Creek General. He found it tucked precisely where he'd slid it under the little rock. He'd taken a duplicate copy without thinking. The paper was thicker than modern register tape, faintly fibrous. The printed numbers were faded brown, not black. The price next to the gallons looked like a story people tell about a better time. But the decimals were correct for what he'd pumped. He ran a finger along the edge and felt the tiniest serration left by a tear-off wheel no one uses anymore. He tried to find Temple Creek on his map. The search returned a river first, then a historical note. A town had existed by that name until a reservoir project in the late 70s drowned its main street and folded its people into neighboring places with higher ground. The images showed a church, white with a square steeple. Postcards from the town had a picture of a river with a low bridge and a duck or two gliding under it. He kept driving. Days moved the way they do on the road. The receipt ended up in the glove box, where he kept registration, a flashlight, and a photograph of a big orange cat that used to sleep on his dash when he ran local. Some nights later, he passed close to the reservoir on a route not his usual, and the water changed in his windshield from black to the same amber he'd seen outside the general store. And back again. A pair of fishermen stood still on the shore. Their rods were at rest. He didn't talk about Temple Creek in the lot, not because he feared being laughed at, but because the story belonged to the night and the way it appeared to someone alone and moving. Once, in a diner tucked along a two-lane, the bell above the door chimed in a note he recognized. He looked at the counter, and the person working there shifted a weight on their shoulders. Just so. That was all. Years later, the Bardwell Winter Festival billboard went up for real. Not in the loop, but along a different stretch. It had the same small tear, and the child's boots made the same reliable marks in the snow. He pulled over and watched the snow in the photo look quiet and clean, perfectly undisturbed. A woman in the parking area spread a blanket for her dog to sit on and pointed to a sled in the picture, smiling. On foggy nights near where the old river ran, the hum of his engine took on a watery tone for a mile, and then resolved back to its usual note. He found that if he set his hand lightly on the dash when that happened, the vibrations softened, as if he'd placed a palm on the shoulder of a horse to steady it. He never saw the LED arrow again. But sometimes the wind gathered the dust along the shoulder and twisted it into a hesitant shape, a wide, slow curve like a suggestion. He followed the main line every time, straight and true, and the dust settled back into the ordinary. There was no harm to him in any of it. There was simply a suggestion, a loop that wanted a rider. He had made a different choice, a small one that felt like a passing thought in a sea of others. He stuck to his lane. He made delivery on time. The receipt in the glove box continued to be made of unusual paper. Once, when cleaning out the cab, he found a postcard that wasn't one of his Temple Creek. It said, the same white church, and a river gliding under a low bridge. The back was blank. He left it in the glove box, not as a talisman, not as a warning, but because it felt wrong to throw it away. Drivers pass places without noticing them. Places pass drivers without insisting on being noticed. On the prairie, this is how it goes. A name in wood, a bell with a gentle note, a road that wants to keep a traveler a little longer. He moved on, as the road asked him to, and the stars returned to their usual distances above him, and the mile markers ticked along, faithful as a heartbeat. Story number 2. Mara ran a refrigerated trailer across the mountain spine that split 2 states and held its own weather. The day had been warm in the valley, a late harvest filling her rig with crates that breathed a soft green scent. By night, the air thinned and chilled. The climb ahead would be steep, a ladder of switchbacks that could pull a person's thoughts into odd shapes if the fog came down. She preferred night runs for the quiet on the road. The cab hummed with a living, steady sound. The dash lit her hands in a mild glow. On the passenger seat, her thermos clicked softly as it settled. The engine brake had a low murmur she found calming, like someone pacing a room with long, patient steps. A sign warned of grade and curve, posted years ago and weathered. She touched the radio knob and left it on channel 19, where the road had a voice. A few rigs checked in, past simple courtesies, mile markers, debris on the shoulder, a reminder to downshift before the descent. Mara had learned that the radio could be a balm, or a window, or a simple, practical tool. The light on it was a small, calm star in her night. Fog found her as she crossed 4,000 feet. It didn't sweep in fast. It collected, bit by bit, a lace of mist in the rocks at first, then a breath across the windshield, then a decision. Low beams on, high beams useless in the white. The shoulder posts appeared and vanished, their reflectors like small, polite eyes that couldn't quite keep up. She eased on the engine brake and felt the load steady itself behind her, all that weight trusting her hands. Her fingers stayed light on the wheel. She kept a little more space from the center line than the sign suggested. Out here, advice from a sign had to be translated through whatever the mountain decided. The voice started as a scratch in the static, and then shaped into words as if it had been there already, waiting for her to notice. "Brake for the northbound reefer at the second ramp," it said, low and even. A voice that didn't ask to be trusted but offered a feeling like a warmed coat. "You've got a gate strap lifting on the right. 6 inches of slack. It'll flutter itself free by the third curve if you don't tuck it." Mara blinked at the mirrors, then checked again. In the beams, fog made every distance uncertain, but the contour of something loose appeared where it shouldn't be, near the top of the door. She eased to a slow roll and took the next turnout, a little gravel lip carved into the hillside for exactly these needs. The mountain was quiet enough to hear the small grits under her shoes when she stepped down. She circled the trailer and found the strap wagging. Harmless for now, trouble later. She cinched it down, gloved fingers efficient. When she climbed back in, the radio murmured again. "No drama, just a presence. Appreciate it," she said into the mic, the habit of courtesy as much for herself as anyone listening. "Northbound reefer, thank you for the eyes." "Copy," the voice returned. "Call me homebound gray when it gets thick. I'll ride you up to the crest." Names on the radio could be a kind of poetry, chosen or given by habit. Homebound gray sounded like an old blanket. Mara's smile didn't quite show, but it softened her shoulders. She rolled out, merged back into her lane, and the turnout vanished behind her like a pocket that had been turned inside out and then righted. The fog deepened into a thing that wasn't just weather. The sound of the engine shifted to fit it, as if a room had been added around her. The world narrowed to a tunnel of white that accepted only modest speed and careful choices. The outside signs, the guardrail posts, the rock faces, came whenever they pleased. She drove the grade by memory and feel the angle of the wheel, the slight lean on the trailer through a left curve, the way the engine brake kept the whole set in tidy alignment. In the mirror, her trailer was a gentle ghost. "Northbound reefer, you're coming up on the drip ridge," homebound gray said. There was a faint hum under his words, like a distant fan. "Hold center where you want to drift. Inside lane has seep. It ices even when the rest does not. Keep your eyes soft. Don't chase the white line." The white line isn't true this week. She followed his instructions because they were careful and measured, not because a stranger on the radio told her what to do. She held the crown of the pavement, the part that had been worn into shape by the weight of long years. The fog made illusions. The white paint on the right was brighter where water collected, and brighter still where the rock face leaned close and offered back its light. A person could steer toward that brightness and find a shoulder that didn't want company. She kept her hands easy and let the bumps tell her where she was. The bumps were maps, if a person treated them kindly. "Thank you, Gray," she said, and the radio replied with a simple click that felt a lot like a nod. The mile markers came and went in a way that didn't satisfy. She would pass one, and then lose count. Not because her mind drifted, but because the fog erased the world between and left time to do what it wanted. The mountain had always done that. Drivers learned to use other clocks, the rumble strips, the scent of cedar, the small rise where a creek crossed under the highway and returned to itself. "Next pullout will look friendly," Gray said. "Lights on. Machine selling coffee. Don't take it." The grade's steeper there than they remembered. The asphalt slides when it gets cold. Keep on for 2 more and you'll get a safe shoulder with a blue reflector low on the post. It's blue because somebody used what they had. Mara eased around a curve and saw just what he meant. A turnoff with lights that looked warmed by company. A standalone vending machine under a shelter. The kind of old-fashioned comfort that could talk a person into stopping whether they needed to or not. The fog wrapped it and made it dreamlike. In her mirror, as she passed, the machine's face never quite looked back like a real motion-detecting display. It stayed at the same brightness, the way a picture stays the same brightness no matter what the light in the room does. Her hand stayed on the wheel. The road went on. She took the next safe shoulder to breathe and check her mirrors. There, a reflector at ankle height did glow blue, a cool star among the regular ones. It was a small thing somebody had done because something else was missing. She nodded at it, though there was no one to see, and guided the rig back into the lane. "Evergreen's quiet tonight," homebound Gray said, as if they were about to pass a town with a library and a sidewalk that sloped more than it had to. Used to have 3 uniforms on a fog night. They'd park the cruisers sideways at the turnout by mile 6 and pulse the light to catch folks coming in too warm. Not tonight. Mara understood that kind of service. A pulse of light was a signal that wasn't just about authority, it was about rhythm and breathing. She pictured the turnout with a cruiser angled to throw calm color through fog. The mental image gave her something like balance. She wondered if Gray was in a cruiser or in a shack with a radio and a thermos. She didn't ask. People didn't ask much up here at night. Needs found their own edges. "Take the inside for the horseshoe," he said. "The outside metal posts have frost on the tops. You may not see it, but you'll feel it in the wheel. Let it pass through you. Don't fight what isn't fighting you." She did as he said. The curve came, and the posts stood like a quiet audience that had been here for generations. The fog made them all the same height, the same distance, the same mood. She held the inside, and the rig's weight settled into the road, like a hand softening into a glove. By the time the crest arrived, she didn't so much see it as understand that she was no longer climbing. The pullback in her thighs, the angle of the cab, subtleties in the engine's voice, all of it agreed. The world on the other side would be the long, careful descent that felt like counting backward. "Let me ride you down to the river," Gray said, voice a shade softer. "There's a new greater ridge at 2 miles, tall enough to tap your springs if you're not ready for it, tall enough to wake something you meant to let sleep." She wanted to say something light, but tuck it in a pocket for later. The fog made humor sound louder than she wanted it to. She drove. The greater ridge announced itself with no drama, just a firm hand through the tires. She softened her own hands to meet it. The second switchback had a sign that somebody had cleaned recently. Water still beaded on the bolts. It was an odd thing to notice, and a comforting one. People had been here today. People who did their jobs well. By mile 6, so said the tiny marker, that had the decency to show itself. She felt the drop in the air that meant the river wasn't far. River air was different. It had space in it, and the fog sometimes took that space as permission to stand taller, or sit down, or go quiet as if someone entering a room had said please. She eased the engine brake to a lower setting, and let gravity take nothing she didn't offer it. "Evergreen Station in half a mile," Gray said. "It's there even when it isn't open. If you want a place to stop and regroup before the flats, take the dirt just past the second sign. The pavement looks like it continues, but it doesn't, not the way you want. The dirt pad is level. Someone hauled in crushed river rock years ago. It still remembers how to be steady." She saw the break in the fog that a building's edges create, the absence of fog where the world ends and walls begin. A low shape with a horizontal roof, a flagpole without a flag, a rank of short posts like teeth. The station's lights were off, but something in the air around it felt domestic. She took the dirt pad. The tires met the crushed rock with the specific sound of something that had been laid by intent. She drew the parking brake, heard the click and clank of everything taking a breath. When she stepped out, the fog moved around her as if it had manners. She stretched in the faint glow from her own markers. The station had a glass door with wire mesh inside it. A calendar hung beyond. The month forever paused with a photo of a forest turning to gold. There was no number she could make out on it, just the color of leaves. Above the door was a lamp that had burned out or been turned off who knows when. The bulb inside was white and dusted like fruit left too long. Mara set her thermos on the step and poured half a cup. It steamed in the damp. She didn't think about why she did it. She set another cup beside it and filled that too, as if a person might be embarrassed to drink from her thermos directly. She didn't say anything out loud. She listened to how quiet the mountain was. Even quiet has texture. This quiet had the texture of wool. The radio whispered with a small amount of static, and then homebound Gray's voice drifted in, like a person in the next room turning and saying thanks without drawing attention. "Good eyes," he said. "You run with respect. There's a lot of road after the river. Keep it soft for the bridge. They'll salt the east side tomorrow. She nodded without thinking and put the thermos back together. She waited a minute longer, a courtesy to the unseen. Then climbed in, checked mirrors, checked gauges, and went. The fog thinned. The world resumed its shapes. By the time she crossed the bridge at the river, the trees had sketched themselves back into her side windows, their black lace more familiar than every instrument in the dash. At the first rest area on the flat, she pulled in for a quick check. The vending machines here were a modern glow, humming like shelves of aquariums. She asked a pair of drivers if they'd ever heard of homebound Gray up on the grade. One of them, a bearded man with careful eyes, nodded slowly. "Once in a storm," he said. "He told me not to take a shoulder that looked honest. He was right. I never saw the station open though, ever." The other driver frowned a little in that way a person does when holding two ideas that don't match. "Evergreen closed in the 90s, he said, not unkindly. "Pile up in fog. After that, they cut staff down and put the budget in signs. Don't think anybody sat that radio since. Not official." Mara took that in. The word pile-up landed with caution in the mind, and then rested. No pictures, no heat, just a note in the log of a place. She finished her coffee and looked at the hill quietly visible on the horizon, the pass now hiding itself with daytime manners. When she returned the next night, a return run with a light load and a long view, she brought an extra cup in the cab. Fog lifted off the river like breath from sleep, then rose and returned to the grade, unrolling a soft coverlet. The mountain didn't do the same thing twice, but it performed variations on a theme it liked. Up she went, hands ready. At the dirt pad by Evergreen, she paused again, set 2 cups on the step, and sat for a minute to listen. The door's wire mesh made a faint grid of darker and lighter. The calendar behind the glass stayed where it was. She could almost smell paper, warmed by sunlight that wasn't there anymore. On the way down the other side, the voice came again without fanfare. "Thank you for the warm drink," Gray said, the tiniest suggestion of a smile in the way he fell silent on the last word. "Watch for deer 3 miles out. They like the median where it's colder." She watched, and there they were, 2 shapes thoughtful in their own way, ears flicking, delicate legs, part of the fog and not, making intentions and then changing them. She idled past, and they stayed. The road widened. The fog lifted. The day took over with its practical chores and lists. The mountain became a note in her log, and a steadiness in her chest. Weeks turned to a rhythm. She didn't need Gray every time. Sometimes the air was clear, and the grade explained itself plainly. Sometimes snow fell, grains of white composing a music that was already fully written by the time it reached her windshield. Sometimes she made the climb among a handful of other rigs, and the red dots of their rear lights made company enough. When the fog was heavy enough to smooth every texture, she heard him. "Inside on the horseshoe tonight," or "Hold off on that shoulder until the ice gives," or "Count the posts if you get nervous. There'll be 23 on the left before you're free of it." Once she asked too many questions, because questions want to be asked. "Gray, how long you up here?" she said. Voice kept gentle, as if speaking in a library. Silence stretched just long enough to feel like a choice. "Long enough to learn the shape of the land," he said. "Long enough to know names without introductions." He never told her anything she could turn into a record. He didn't ask for anything either. He made a kind of space around her rig where calm choices lived. She learned to carry an extra cup. She learned the blue reflector's exact hue from memory. She learned that the mountain has departments air, water, stone, light, and each has a manager that works nights and keeps the clock running. One clear morning after a week of fog shifts, she took the 2-lane that paralleled the highway to where locals had their mailboxes painted with trout and sunflowers. There was a turnoff that led to the back of Evergreen Station, where a chain-link fence rose and sagged. She parked on the gravel shoulder and stood where the grass had a soft, lean-like hair brushed back. The building wasn't ruined. It was just paused. The paint had held its color longer than it had to. A hand-painted sign on a side door still read radio. Above it, a small metal bracket stuck out. The kind used to hold a coil of cable. She didn't go in. There was nowhere to go in. The door was locked, and the windows were shut tight against weather. But there was a clipboard hanging from a nail under the eave, sheltered from the worst of the elements. It held paper brown with age, the top sheet a grid of lines and a column for fog patrol, and another for notes. The last entry, faded and thin, had a date that could have been read as a month in late fall decades ago. The note said simply, dense, slow, advised. In the margin, a pencil had made a light check mark. The check had the old kind of self-discipline in it, the sort people used at desks with metal edges and fans that rattled. Mara stood long enough to feel she wasn't intruding. She touched the corner of the clipboard, as if to agree with whoever had checked that box. Then she returned to the cab. In the glove box, she kept 2 paper cups inside a plastic sleeve. She wrote on one with a felt tip kept for signing bills of lading. "Thank you," she wrote. And below that, her first name. She left the cup on the step where she always set the thermos. It wasn't anything magical. It was just polite. Fog seasons came and went. The mountain did what mountains do. Moved imperceptibly, shed ice at the right times, gave shade in long angles, made snowplow crews into poets of their own kind. Sometimes, in a diner far from the grade, a driver would mention a voice on 19, a person who said not to trust a shoulder with a friendly machine. No one made a big deal of it. Folks nodded, or said they'd heard similar. Maybe a highway patrol officer with a face like the mountain in winter would say, "Old habits around Evergreen. People keep them even when there's no duty roster." When summer rolled high and dry, with prairie dust drifting in from one direction and cedar pitch sweetening the other, Mara wouldn't hear gray at all. The radio would be the ordinary back and forth of traffic and weather, and notes about a cow that had found its way through a fence and onto the side road near mile 40. The station would look like any other building that someone forgot to tear down. The wall calendar inside stayed crisp in its colors, an autumn leaf forever on the edge of falling. One night in early fall, when rain threatened up high and the valley still smelled like warm dirt, she passed the dirt pad without stopping. Work had run long. She was in that delicate balance between careful and on time. The fog thickened suddenly at the crest, a white that felt like a drawn curtain. Before she could adjust, a family sedan drifted across the center line ahead, barely moving, surprised into confusion by how the world had become close. She didn't touch the horn. It would have made them jump. She simply downshifted and cheated right, gave them the lane and a little more, and made herself a wall of air for them to pass by. It was instinct and practice, and the company of a voice that taught calm. "Good work," Gray said after the sedan had found its side of the road again. "No need for drama." The radio was all soft hum around his words. "There's a little piece of loose trim on your left fairing. It'll whine at you at 45. I wouldn't worry. It'll sing itself out." She felt a warmth at the back of her eyes, the kind that comes when relief finds a place to sit. She breathed in and out and watched the fog accept her passage. After a winter that seemed longer than the calendar suggested, the station acquired a new thing. Someone had repaired the lamp over the door. It didn't come on often, and never during the day, but at odd hours, the glass above the wire mesh filled with a glow like honey. The lamp wasn't bright enough to light the pad. It was bright enough to let the building be seen by those who needed to see it. Some said that meant power had been restored. Some said a sensor was stuck. Some didn't say anything. They drove their road, checked their straps, made their notes. Story number 3. Avery had been running the plains all week, a north-south ribbon where the land spoke in long sentences, and the sky never had to raise its voice. The rain that tapped her windshield near dusk had moved on, leaving the shoulders damp and the air rinsed clean. Night came wide and clear, the kind that lets taillights draw at sensible distances and keeps a driver aware of their own breathing. She kept her speed a shade under posted, a habit that felt like a small respect paid to the quiet. In the cab, her audio had gone to a hush between chapters. The radio on 19 hummed with ordinary talk that tapered into static as towns fell away behind her. She wasn't tired, but she wanted a quick stop, a bathroom, a stretch, a moment to stand under a different light. The next blue sign rose from the shoulder, clean and reflective, "Rest Area 2 miles." Underneath, in smaller letters, it offered a name she didn't recognize, Kettle Ridge. She'd run this interstate for years and didn't remember that name. Maybe it was new. States did that sometimes, reshaped a pull-off, gave it a pleasant title that made sense to someone with a map and a sense of history. Avery checked mirrors, blinked a turn signal without urgency, and drifted toward the deceleration lane when the second sign showed the same name. The exit curve was neat and well paved, with a low guardrail that held a soft gleam. Beyond it, On a low rise, the rest area spread out in a tidy arrangement. A single-story building, with brick the color of dry clay, a stand of ornamental grasses whispering in a small wind, a lone cottonwood that had chosen the place years ago and stayed. Lampposts threw a warmer light than most, honey-colored instead of white, and the parking lot had fresh paint that made the truck slots look as if they had been drawn by a careful hand. There were 3 other rigs in the far row, spaced like polite people in an empty room. A sedan idled for a minute, and then moved on. Avery eased into a spot where the stripes gave generous swing, set the brake, and felt the familiar settling of weight behind her, cargo agreeing to rest. She shut down the engine and listened to how the night sounded here. The distant hiss of highway, the tiny thrum of a transformer, the insects like a faraway shaker. Nothing nervous, nothing loud. Inside, the building was cleaner than it needed to be for this hour. White tile gave back a quiet. A long corridor past the restrooms. A glassed-in map with a brass arrow that said, "You are here," and a vending alcove where 2 machines hummed. The snack selection was the usual mix. The drink machine had hot coils for coffee and cocoa, with paper cups printed in a pattern from a decade ago. Avery fed a bill into the slot and the machine took it on the first try, which felt like grace. The receipt printer chattered a little and offered a strip of paper, and it made her pause because of what the tiny line of text said after the total, "Welcome back." She had never been to Kettle Ridge, not that she knew. She told herself it was a canned phrase the machine used for everyone and let it go. By the map, on a wooden table meant for brochures that nobody ever took, a stack of postcards sat where flyers would normally be. They were not advertisements for nearby caverns or festivals. Each card held a photo of a semi at night, under lights that looked very much like these. One card showed a red cab angled just so, with a small scrape visible on the mirror bracket and a turquoise air freshener hanging from the vent. She felt a respectful tug at the back of her mind and looked away. Lots of red cabs had scrapes. Air fresheners came in that color all the time. Coincidence had a decent batting average. She picked up a different card. This one showed the corner of a reefer trailer caught in amber light. The reflective DOT tape bright, as if brand new. The sky above was a soft dark. In the foreground, a bench with slatted wood carried a brass plaque that read, "In thanks for safe miles." The photo's angle made it impossible to be sure it was taken here. But the lampshades looked the same. On the back was a printed line where a person could write a message, and a small square to mark where a stamp might go. Someone had already written. The ink was a careful blue. "If you see this," the message, the bin and the hand towel roll just so, like whoever was on nights still takes pride. Makes you want to be tidy too. The 4th time she rolled in, the lamplight made a softer halo than usual, and the bench plaque had a faint new polish. She noticed dust on the bottom edge of the corkboard, where someone had missed it by an inch with a cloth. The postcards had a few fewer copies, as if travelers had taken them away. She didn't take the one with her rig on it the first time she saw it. It felt like picking up a mirror. On this night, she reached for it. The photo didn't creep her. It simply said that someone else had stood where she stood and liked the look of a truck in this warm light. On the back, a line of that same blue handwriting drifted into a message that sounded like a person speaking at a kitchen table after midnight. "Your note about the entrance dip has saved 3 trailers from eating a bollard. You wouldn't believe how many glances up here at 213 keep the breathing easy. If you're ever unsure which side of your lane to favor in high wind, look at the grasses. They tell the angle before your wheel does." She put the card in her logbook, not because she believed in anything beyond the facts of the road and the courtesy of the people who use it, but because it seemed wrong to leave it under fluorescent lights. The wind had shifted. The cottonwood rested again. The night smelled like the world after a sprinkle, even though the pavement was dry. On the way out, she glanced at the map's push plate. It gleamed with a tiny smear, a fingertip that had been brave enough to press it and ask for company. Weeks stretched in an ordinary way. Her route changed when dispatch decided the central corridor needed her steadiness on Mondays. She missed Kettle Ridge in the practical sense. A person misses a certain coffee shop when the other is fine. She stopped at lit places where the light was ultraviolet, and the tile was scuffed, and the courtesy was still there, because drivers carry it too. She thought of the binder and the polite blue notes without making it a thing. People make altars out of small comforts when they're low on sleep. She wasn't low, so she made it a memory. In early spring, with fields just beginning to pull a color up out of the black and a line of cloud on the western edge that looked like a hand laid over the horizon. She came back to the corridor that bore the name. The first sign did not say Kettle Ridge. It said only Restoria 2 miles. Her stomach dropped as if a ramp had been pulled from under her foot. She kept breathing and told herself, signs, do this. Paint fades. Letters go missing. She took the exit. The lamplight was there, and the cottonwood, leaves the size of thumbnails just starting to present themselves. The bench plaque had been carefully taped around, as if someone had oiled it and didn't want smears. The postcards were gone from the table. In their place sat a small wooden tray with a handful of brass tokens the size of quarters, each stamped with a single word: easy, slow, look, listen. A card propped up beside them said, take one, leave one if you can. The corkboard had gained one new note, written in a different hand. If you're seeing this and it feels like you're the only one here, you're not. We keep watch whether the map says we do or not. Avery stood there longer than her clock said she should have. She touched one token. Listen, and put it in her pocket the way a person carries a smooth stone. In the bathroom, the air dryer sounded the way they always do. One of the sinks had a small sign taped near it. Out of order, please use next. The tape job looked recent. This was not a place run by ghosts in the loud sense. It was a place maintained by the accumulation of careful choices. When she walked back to her rig, a man she hadn't noticed before stood by the vending machines. He wore a jacket with a reflective stripe that caught the lamplight and made it a dull yellow around his ribs. He didn't look at her. He looked at the floor like he was checking for a dropped coin. He pressed the cocoa button, waited, and took the cup away without sipping. He moved with the unhurried pace of someone on a break between tasks that require attention. She passed him with a nod she would have given to anyone. He nodded back with an expression that didn't need to turn into a smile to count. That week, a postcard found its way into her company mailbox, the one where bills of lading occasionally got misdirected and memos about health plans showed up with cartoon apples. The postcard bore the image of a bench under scooped light. The brass plaque was visible, and there was her rig again. But at a slightly different angle, wheel turned a fraction, as if she'd corrected herself while easing into the slot. No stamp, no cancellation. Just a message on the back, in the blue script she could have picked out from a pile. Engine running was the right call at 2:13. Your lights made someone brave enough to pull in. Safe miles to you, Avery. The last detail took a second to land. Her name. People can know names without looking into anything, without making themselves a problem. She pressed the card to the table, and then eased her grip. She didn't feel watched. She felt seen in the way a highway sees a truck that knows how to behave. After that, she still stopped other places. She still preferred a well-lit lot. She memorized where the cleanest sinks lived along her route. But when the sign with the unfamiliar name rose out of the dark, she took it. She checked the corkboard and added to it. Snow melts into a slick at the east edge first, she wrote once, late in a March that couldn't decide what to do. Another time, early July, she pinned, watch for little rabbits in the grass by the lower curb. They freeze when they hear air brakes. She never pressed the push plate. She kept the token in her pocket until it wore smooth, and then left it on the bench plaque, a coin among a few others. The cottonwood did what cottonwoods do, shed and leaf, complain, and rest. Once she parked farther away, even though the wind was from the north, just because a habit formed by being careful is often its own reward. The strangest thing about Kettle Ridge, the thing that managed to be gently disturbing long after the rest settled into comfort, was the timing. How the postcard seemed to know the minute inside the hour that mattered. How a note in the binder might be dated a day ahead and still be right. How the lamplight felt a fraction warmer when she needed to remember there were other people in the night besides her and the road. She didn't talk about it much in lots. Drivers tell stories. Drivers also keep some. If someone asked whether there was a rest area by that name, she said yes and left it tidy. If someone joked about places that didn't show on maps, she didn't make fun of the notion. There was room in the world for a place that functioned on courtesy and timing. On a late autumn run, with a wind that had the first clean edge of cold, and a strip of sky where geese passed in a tilted line, she found the binder open to a fresh page. The ink was darker than before, the hand a touch different. Lights out in West Lot, it read. placed cones. Advised. Two drivers put their hazards on and made a soft fence. Nobody got surprised. She smiled in her chest and closed the cover with respect. On the back of one more card that she allowed herself to take just one, someone had written a truth she could carry. There is a group of people on every mile who think about the minute you pass. They are the ones who paint lines, clear branches, make the cocoa work, look for rabbits by the curb. They won't always be seen. You don't need to see them for it to matter. But if you do see them, say hello in whatever way your night allows. She didn't write back. She put the card with the others in her logbook, a slim stack held by a rubber band. Each showed a different angle of the same gentle place. Each carried a message that was specific without being strange. She drove on. There were groceries to deliver, and a city to skirt, and a prairie land to cross, while the sky did what the sky does best: stand there and be the whole ceiling of a world that needs careful drivers. Once, long miles from Kettle Ridge, at an ordinary rest area with bright, blue-white light, a janitor singing softly to himself as he wrung out a mop, and a loud hand dryer that made a child laugh, Avery saw a brass plaque on a bench that had no inscription yet. The bench sat heavier than it needed to. It felt patient. She thought, just for a second, of what words she would ask to be put there when the time came for someone to have that kind of idea. In Thanks for Safe Miles, it seemed enough. Story number 4. Rafi hauled coil steel across a high mesa where night had a way of smoothing distance until it looked like a single long breath. He liked this run for the straight lanes and the clear sight lines, even when the wind came in at an angle and tested every strap he'd tightened by feel. The load sat low and centered on the flatbed, chained and belted until the steel was part of the rig's spine. When air moved, the whole set answered subtle, contained, like a cello string touched with a careful hand. Out here, he could hear it. Out here, the road made a sound. The load made a sound. And the sky offered a quiet that let both be understood. He hit the plateau. After midnight. The highway rose gently and then laid itself flat, the way a table is set before a meal. On either side, wind turbines marked the land in precise rows. Their red obstruction lights blinked with measured patience, a constellation arranged by engineers and pilots. In the day, the white blades moved like big, polite arms. At night, they vanished into the sky, leaving only the heartbeat of their lights to say, "We are here." Rafi took speed down a notch. He knew this stretch by its mileposts, and by the way crosswinds found the gaps where arroyos cut the mesa. He knew it by smell too cold, sage brightened by a hint of dust, the dry scent of rock cooling after a warm day. He rolled the window down 2 inches. The air slipped in and said, "Steady for now. Mind the dips." He didn't touch the CB. 19 had been quiet. The long-haul chatter from earlier had ghosted away with the evening shift change. He let the rig talk to him instead, the minor tremor through the wheel, the almost silent thump as the tires skimmed a expansion joint, the satisfied hum of a diesel not straining or loafing, just living in the middle. The first oddness didn't shout. It arrived like a suggestion. At mile 212, a ribbon of turbines began blinking out of step with the rest. The red points didn't sink. They rippled not fast, not slow, but in a wave that moved from west to east with the faintest sense of intention. He put it down to a different model of light, or a controller choosing a new mode for aviation. He watched anyway. The ripple passed. A minute later, a crosswind tapped him from the west. The straps murmured in a chord he recognized as the sound of wind stacking itself across canvas and chain. He corrected gently, and the rig kept true. Behind him, imaginary dust rose not enough to see, just enough to think. At mile 214, the ripple ran again, 1 row north, like a hand smoothing the edge of a blanket. A few seconds after, another tap from the west. He kept his eyes on the road and filed the thought where a driver puts things that might matter. The mind is a good warehouse when it's treated with respect. Signage here spoke plainly. High winds possible. Trucks use caution. There was a windsock mounted on a framed gate near a maintenance road. It hung neutral, either because the night had chosen a still minute or because fabric does what it wants after too many seasons. Rafi trusted his straps more than that tube. He trusted the drumbeat of warning he felt in his hands. The highway offered a narrow bridge over an arroyo the map called Dry Draw. even though it held a ribbon of water from a late storm far off. The bridge had concrete rails and a steel deck at its heart. Steel sings when tires cross it. On wind nights, that song can wobble. He'd been across plenty. He listened to the turbine lights and watched them ripple again, west to east. He counted to 5. The coil hummed a shade more. He breathed and settled himself for the push he knew was coming halfway over the span. When it came, it wasn't a slap. It was a firm nudge. He let the lane hold him, eased pressure just so, and watched the mirror but not too long. He reached the far side with the rig comfortable and the straps saying nothing new. No voice told him what to do. The road and the lights did. He liked that better, less mystery, more translation. He glanced at the dash clock. 12:46. The time zone line, the meridian, sat a few miles ahead, where state lines bent to meet and the atlas got a little fussy. The turbines came closer to the highway near Substation 9, a low, fenced rectangle with a single building and a yard of spools and cable. An amber beacon spun there, the old-fashioned kind with mirrors and a bulb inside. It threw a soft rotating glow that rode the fence and went out, and then came back. On the gate, a small sign read, "Be safe," in neat letters. Rafi felt his shoulders drop a notch. No one had to put those words there. Someone had, anyway. He returned the thought with an almost smile no one could see and kept on. At mile 219, the highway lifted slightly and then went soberly flat. Turbines bracketed the road on both sides. This row blinked in unison. The red was a measured breath. Then, as if the sky had counted him, the lights split their timing and ran a slow chase again, west to east. He murmured, noted, to the wheel, and the wind came on in gentle agreement. The mesa had a taste for small illusions. Ground glow from a service road made a hint of another set of headlights where none were. Heat held low, over scrub, set up a ripple that a tired mind could misread as motion. He wasn't tired enough for that, but when he caught, in very distant vision, the slightest hint of a box of light about his size, moving a long quarter-mile ahead, he felt a pull. It was like seeing yourself in glass you didn't know was there. He caught it once, and then lost it, and then caught it again, at the exact angle where red lights above blinked out of phase with themselves. A mirror made of air. The shape kept pace. When he blinked, it didn't. When he tapped his hazard lights twice, a habit sometimes used to say thanks, it flashed too, just out of sync, as if it had thought of it a fraction of a second before he did. He didn't play with it. He doesn't play with night. He took in another breath and returned his attention fully to the lane, to the arrowheads painted on the pavement in a short construction section that had been left neat and clean for the off hours. There were barricades stacked on the shoulder, sleeping like folded animals. At mile 220, just before the meridian, the turbine ripples stopped. Everything went back to a common blink. It's a trick of the mind when the world aligns like that. It can make everything feel colder or warmer. He felt the world draw itself close and then spread itself out again, like a person opening their hands after showing you they're empty. The time zone line was marked by a blue sign that said, "Welcome," with a symbol for the state that always felt a little old-fashioned, like the corner of a postcard. As the nose of his rig crossed the invisible line, the dash clock flipped. 12:59 became 12. For a breath, night held its air. He felt it like coming into a chapel, where sound changes simply because the shape of the room tells it to. In that breath, the reflection again, his own rig. A heartbeat ahead, a heartbeat behind flashed hazards twice. It would have been nothing if not for what happened next. A deer stepped neatly from the median, saw him, and reconsidered. It worked that equation by instinct, and so did he. He coasted, made space for any second guesses, and the deer took 2 precise leaps and vanished into safety. He hadn't needed a warning to do the right thing. The small echo made the right thing feel like a plan. The meridian gave a little wink of different gravity and then let go. The lights on the turbines kept their measured pace. It should have been uneventful from there to the turn for the fabrication plant. It almost was. But almost is where stories sit sometimes. The first time he saw the white pickup on the service road, he thought, crew, night shift, troubleshooting a yaw motor or tightening a hatch. The beacon on top turned lazily, He could not see a person. No big deal. The second time, hours later on the return run, the pickup sat in the same spot, beacon still turning, like a porch light left on when you go around back. He took the gravel pull-out half a mile on, the one meant for working trucks to check loads after wind, and did exactly that, glove over strap, palm over chain, a practice note in the mind for each satisfying, undramatic answer. The coil sat like a well-behaved animal. He put a hand on the deck and felt its warmth in the night air, a quiet reminder of friction and the far-off heat the steel had been born from. The beacon continued panning the dark. He set one of his reflective triangles by the mouth of the pullout. The rulebook said, triangles for disabled vehicles, but a triangle can also serve as punctuation for a sentence that says, something's happening over there, take caution. Thank you. He didn't linger. He climbed back in, checked his mirrors as if the night itself were a driver merging near him, and rolled. At substation 9, the amber beacon still turned. The turbines on the nearest row blinked in a pattern that had become familiar. 2 beats, pause, 2 beats. Rafi matched his breathing to it for half a mile, and felt silly only in the way you do when something works, and you know you'll never explain it convincingly to someone who needs a chart. He let the road begin its steady descent. Before he left the high ground, he glanced at the beacon one last time. It felt like saying thank you to a streetlight. He delivered the coil at a plant that ran late, forklifts beeping with a kind of sleepy cheer. A guard at the shack with a thermos and a crossword turned to Wednesday. When the guard stamped his bill of lading, the stamp made a firm, satisfying noise. The guard asked about the wind up top. Rafi said it was the usual. The guard nodded and said, they put the lights into ripples sometimes when gust fronts come through. Pilot says it keeps eyes from chasing the wrong blink. Heard that from a tech who knows the software. He shrugged. Also heard an older tech flips a manual switch because it feels right. I like that version better. On the next week's run, clouds had pooled far to the west and then decided to walk toward the plateau as a single, organized gray. He caught their motion in the mirror at dusk. By midnight, they were over the mesa, not dramatic, just present. The red lights on the turbines looked softer against that ceiling, like embers seen through thin cloth. At mile 210, a sign warned, high crosswinds. Next 20 miles. The wind obliged. It wasn't angry, it was thorough. The straps set up their cord and held it. Professional as always. Rafi slid a fingertip along the edge of a buckle and felt it grade school scale another notch into confidence. The truck answered his hands with the relaxed tension of a bridge that knows what it's for. Something small brightened on the roadside ahead, 2 eyes low to the ground. Not deer, not coyote. A fox, perhaps, or a stray dog. It paused and then made a choice that took it away from the lane. He never had to touch the horn. Little calculations do themselves all night on highways. Most of them end well. By substation 9, lightning had started in the far cloud bank. Not strikes to ground sheet lightning, the sky lighting itself up to remind everyone about scale, and then settling back into dark. The amber beacon at the substation caught the flashes, went invisible, and then returned, the rhythm unbroken. The ripple in the red lights ran from west to east, and then new behavior east to west back again, a kind of answer. He thought of someone on night shift looking out at the highway and deciding that both directions deserved a little warning. He pulled into a narrow turnout meant for maintenance, a place barely wider than the lane, and set his hazards for a minute to let a light car slip ahead. Its driver had been hovering uncertainly beside him, nobody's favorite feeling. When it had passed and steadied itself half a mile ahead, he clicked the hazards off and went. The truck felt better for it. Small kindness is grease in the bearings of the night. The meridian waited with its postcard sign. The moment the dash clock would flip approached. He didn't make anything of it. The turbines in this stretch blinked together. Then, just at the blue sign, they stopped. Not went dark, held steady, red points fixed. It lasted only the length of a single breath, but it changed the shape of that second. His clock swung from 12:59 to 12. In the reflection of his windshield, something aligned. For a long blink, he saw his rig as if in a window, moving at exactly his speed. It raised its hazard lights once. He didn't mimic. He was too busy watching the road, but he felt the intent like a driver in another cab nodding. A mile later, The bridge over dry-draw steel deck white rail took a gust hard from the west. He had planned for it because of the ripple. He met it with a degree of give. The coil didn't argue. The straps held a note, and then let it fall. By then, he had built a map in his head of which rows blinked when gusts came up. How much time he had between the wave and the lights and the touch on his trailer. It wouldn't have made sense to anyone else. He didn't tell it to anyone. He didn't make it anything more than what it was. Useful for this night, this load, this run. He stopped once more at a wider turnout near a gate numbered row 45. The white pickup sat again on the maintenance road, beacon still turning, not closer, not farther. He killed the engine and stepped down into air that smelled charged, even if nothing was close enough to explain it. The pickup silhouette had dust on it in a particular way, like a cloth had gone over the hood in a long, slow figure eight some afternoon. He left 2 bottles of water on the inside of the fence by the gate where wind wouldn't take them and wrote the date in grease pencil on the plastic. He didn't expect anything. He put the habit in the same file as carrying extra fuses and lending out a tarp when rain turned up mean. At the plant on that trip back, a tech in a dark jacket with reflective piping stood near the guard shack. He had the look of someone who could name every mechanical thing in the yard by the sound it made. He nodded at Rafi's rig the way people do when they like how you've secured your life. "They ever pull that ripple on you up there?" he asked, chin in the direction of the plateau. Rafi said they had. The tech nodded. "We do it when gusts come through in packets. Old habit. The software can handle it, but the manual switch lives where it always did. Some nights, a person's hand is better at calling rhythm than a line of code. You feel silly for doing it until you see a trailer hold. Then you don't." Rafi thought of the pickup, the beacon, the water bottles. He thought of the way the red lights had held steady at the meridian, long enough for 1 second to feel a little kinder. Weeks later, a new run put him on a schedule with a weather system that pretended it would miss him and then changed its mind. Rain walked the plateau in bands, polite but firm. The wind farm responded, some blades feathered, some slowed, some stopped entirely. The red lights kept their duty, as they are meant to. In the rainy dark, the turbine bases were just suggestions, and the red points above became the road ceiling. The ripple came early, then held a beat, then doubled like a drummer tapping a stick to count someone in. The road itself offered a warning, a sheen that wasn't just wet, a shift in the sound at the edges of the lane where standing water nudged gravel. He kept his lane, slowed in the way that makes everyone behind you forgive you for it. And the night allowed the whole line to pass through something that might have been trouble if someone had tried to hurry. He didn't. He had nothing to prove. A mile on, a short truck ramp cut off to the right with fresh gravel. For a breath, and just barely, he imagined a hand divided by lamp at substation 9, turning the switch down and up at the right moment to match the rain. It was a strange thought, not spooky, simply human. By the time the meridian came into view, the rain had lightened. The clock did its neat trick. He wondered, not for the first time, how many drivers used that flip in time as a breathing mark. In days of old, the railroad had station masters to hash out timing. Out here, he had a dash and a sign and a sky full of wires, and that was enough. One last thing happened before he left the wind farm behind for a different season. On a night clear enough to see the long curve of the road ahead, but dark enough that the stars in his side window seemed like small towns, he saw a vest hanging on the fence at row 45. Not flapping like a forgotten flag, but placed, hooked by its shoulder strap on the wire. It was the color that keeps people safe, and it had reflective stripes that caught his lights only when he looked right at it. He slowed and took the pull-out he trusted. He stepped down and unhooked it. The vest was new. A tag still tucked into a seam. Inside the vest, tucked in a pocket, sat a small card with the words, "Be safe," in neat letters, the same hand as the sign at the substation's gate. He laughed once, quietly, deeply. It was a good joke that only a few people would get. He put the vest in his cab behind the seat where he kept tools that matter. He left, tucked into the fence wire. One of his own, a vest he'd bought as backup and not needed yet. It wasn't quite as new, but it was clean and bright. It looked right against the line of wire under the small red sky. He got back in, eased back onto the lane, and as he passed substation 9, the amber beacon seemed to coincide with the flash from the nearest turbine. A tiny, unremarkable moment of instep light. He smiled and didn't tell anyone about it except the road, by touching the wheel once with the flat of his palm, a driver's private salute. The plateau widened into country without turbines, and then the highway unwound toward lower ground where billboards took up nothing but ink and sky. Rafi finished the night like a lot of night's gauges where he liked them, a load that had behaved itself, miles that sat in his chest like proof that routine, done well, is its own kind of luck. He wouldn't have said he believed in wind, telling the road's future. He would have said a lot of people made a lot of small good decisions out there in the dark, and sometimes those decisions showed themselves through a blink in a light or a hum in a strap. The mesa could keep its red stars, and its ripple. He'd take them when they came, and when they didn't, he still had his hands, the wheel, the habit of looking ahead before he needed to, and a vest on the fence where someone else might have a night go easier because of it. Weeks turned to months, and the run shifted to another corridor. Once in a while, rolling out under a different sky, he would see a line of warning lights climb a hill, then step down the far side like people descending theater stairs after last call. The memory of the ripple would pass his mind and then keep going. He'd check a strap by feel and listen for the coil's answer. If he crossed a timeline somewhere else, he'd catch the tidy flip of digits and let that be a good place to breathe. And long afterward, on a morning when night was giving up and day hadn't taken charge yet, he saw at the edge of another yard the new vest he'd hung at row 45. It hung on the mirror of a service pickup idling by a gate. A man in a dark jacket with reflective piping climbed in, checked his own mirror, and made for the highway running up into wind. He turned a switch on the dash, and an amber beacon came to life. Rafi lifted his fingers on the wheel in a wave only he could see, and the pickup's light answered by doing its job. The turbines at the far edge of the sky made their red heartbeat. The night, as always, made room. Story number 5. Nadine liked the nights when salt lived in the air. The run took her along a causeway that skimmed the skin of the marsh, miles of concrete lifted on stout legs above a quilt of water and grass. The cargo behind her breathed cold. Boxes stacked tight and ripe leafy greens headed to a dawn market in a port city that looked, at night, like a necklace of lights floated close to shore. She had driven desert and high plain, but the coast made a different music. Frogs like soft maracas in the cattails, a far-off bell where a buoy marked a channel, the occasional low hum from a tug making its slow language to a barge somewhere out in the black. The highway here offered no shoulder, just a stripe and a rail, and then the wide, dark water. Lamps spaced themselves like patient guardians, warm sodium glow casting a syrupy reflection that turned every puddle on the deck into a little orange lake. Wind came from the south that night, a breath that carried damp and a clean hint of fish and mud and metal. She rolled her window down a finger's width to let the air in. It had the steady feel of weather that had decided to be mild. For now, signs had names on them that sounded like stories. Kingfisher Cut, Crane Row, Holloway Spillway. Nadine knew where she was by those names, as much as by mile markers. She also knew the places where the causeway narrowed from 2 lanes to 1 at a draw, the places where an operator would lift a span for a shrimp boat, the places where the river wriggled under the road, with the stubborn grace of something that had been here before concrete and would be here after. Near midnight, she crossed the long approach to marker 12, the part with the small radio tower off to the right, guy wires humming when a wind chose to play them. Her CB hissed, and then caught a voice that did not belong to the usual night. It wasn't the normal Channel 19 shuffle of road notes, not the clipped practical of way stations or lane closures. The sound drifted like it had traveled across water. A sign, on tone, a soft click, and then a man's voice, low and calm and careful. Bridge tender at mile 19 to southbound freight on the Holloway, it said. Not Holloway like the sign, but Holloway, like a thing you could pass through. The diction was old-fashioned, the kind of measured broadcast tone you heard in archival weather tapes. Mind the wet iron at the wedge. Favor the center stripe. If you can hear me, tap your horn twice when the green gives 3. Her hand hovered over the mic, and then returned to the wheel. The CB readout said 19. She had not changed it. Bleed happens, especially near water. Radio can be a game of chance, where old voices find the low backs of the night and ride them. She remembered the mile 19 draw, a small, square operator house perched on a box of riveted steel, windows facing each direction. The draw lifted in a single clean angle, not a swing, not a bascule, an older style, Retired to rarely, used status when the new channel took most of the traffic. A sign back at marker 15 had warned of a single lane ahead, but the sign had leaned at a tired angle, as if it had weathered too many storms in too few hands. Her foot eased the speed down a shade. Her mirrors showed the long line behind her as a string of reflected points. No one pressed her. People who pressed on these nights had their own arrangements with luck. She rounded the long left that set the causeway straight for the draw. The water under her changed from black mirror to black corduroy as a breeze riffled it. A heron, tall as a person and twice as dignified, stood knee-deep by a marsh edge and watched her approach as if this were all part of its shift. Ahead, the operator house sat like a square thought, lamp in its window dark. The green light on the navigation marker to the right bled its color into the water, a steady hue for a beat, then off, then on. It didn't flash 3 in a row. It did a single beat, then a wider one. Her turn signal clicked once out of habit, a motion of the hand that was less about lane and more about making sound in the silence, and the CB lilted to life again, the same voice, a breath closer. Bridge tender at 19 to southbound freight, it said, a shade softer. The green's late tonight. Count the bell in the cut and hold your wheel a quarter turn to the high side over the joint. Wet iron will sit you down if you meet it flat. No drama necessary. She laughed once, quiet. Not because it was funny, but because the voice sounded like it had long experience with drivers who could handle a little instruction without thinking it an offense. She set her hands where they liked to sit best and took stock. The joint at the center of an older draw can shoulder up a fraction of an inch if the weather has its say. Hit it square at too much speed, and you make a note in your own log you don't feel like writing later. Hit it with a little angle, eased and polite, and the rig takes it like a step instead of a door jam. The buoy bell in the cut to her right chimed 3 times. The green on the marker woke and blinked a tidy 3. She tapped her horn twice, the briefest of acknowledgments. The operator house window, dark as it was, held a rectangular shape that looked, for a second, like someone standing there with hands on a railing, satisfied with the exchange. She rolled over the joint and felt it as a polite knock through the tires, nothing more. She kept the center stripe under her left shoulder. It felt good, the way a small thing feels good when night could have used a sharper edge. Beyond the draw, the causeway opened a fraction. A fishing skiff with a blue tarp over its bow eased along the far side of the channel, its outboard barely a noise. Someone in it raised a hand without waving, a gesture that said, "I see you." She couldn't be sure they weren't looking at someone else. The night makes witnesses where none are needed and none expected. She didn't tell anyone about the voice. It didn't ask to be told. She reached the port turnoff and found the dockyard part awake forklifts, moving pallets in deliberate choreography, a watchman in a booth, tracing his finger down a list. The air carried coffee, diesel, and the common perfume of rope and waxed crate drape. Her paperwork took a note of Green Market, stall 3, timestamp 117. When she climbed back into the cab, the causeway out in the dark rested like a ribbon the town had forgot to take down after a parade. On the run back across, lighter now, she tuned the CB down to a murmur out of respect for the hour and for the small bubble of focus that lives between city and road. The marsh smelled more like grass. The frogs sent up an orchestra from the margins. The bell in the cut was quieter. When she reached the long approach to the draw, the operator house window glowed faint enough to make a person doubt it. She could have been seeing the reflection of her own marker lights. She eased anyway because the mind she drove with had learned to accept gentle advice from the edges of things. The second night had weather of a different opinion. A fog hunkered down low and decided to be comfortable. Not a rolling theater fog, not a horror story curtain, just a presence, letting the lamps throw wider halos than usual, making the marsh and water into softer shapes. She moved with the kind of care that feels like walking barefoot in a house where someone else is asleep. At marker 15, a crew had left temporary cones from an earlier lane sweep, but 2 had fallen in like question marks toward the stripe. She clicked her hazard for a breath, made space, and slid by. In the rear view, they looked like small animals that had chosen to nap in the wrong place. Beyond, the fog had gathered nearer to the deck. She had never wanted mountain fog advice on a causeway. This was different. It changed sound before it changed sight. The CB spoke again as she passed the radio tower. The same tone, same careful way with words. Tender at 19 to southbound freight, if you can hear me. South wind's given the laminations a skin. Favor the center. Tap twice if you'd like the lamp to wake. The lamp. Nadine had never seen it burning. She'd also never thought to ask for it to. Her hand found the horn, gave the gentlest of 2 beats. Up ahead, the operator house window brightened, then steadied, then stayed, a warm copy of the lamplight on the posts but more domestic, as if a person had stepped into an empty room and reached for a switch by habit. The glow painted the joint. The wet iron, if there had been any slick, could not pretend. She crossed with the same moderate angle as the night before, and felt the bid and answer of the truck and the span like a secret handshake. She wasn't the only one on the causeway. A small car came up a touch too quickly behind, checked itself, and sat in the safe pocket of her lights as if borrowing courage. The lamp in the operator house did a small hiccup to the right nonsense. Really, probably a reflection, and the car made a better decision than it had intended. On the city side, the seafood yard was livelier. A man in a yellow rain jacket waved her into a slot where measurements mattered. He squeezed between stack and wall like a person born for narrow lanes. He asked if the fog was sitting down on the marsh, and nodded when she said yes. He said, "You watch that old draw at 19. They say it's got a mood." He smiled, and immediately looked like he thought better of saying that to someone working. She smiled back. "It told me to take the center stripe," she said, making it a joke. He tapped his clipboard like he approved of a good answer. It took days for her to ask anyone about a tender. The office in daylight said what the office in daylight would. That the draw was automated now. That a sensor on the water commanded operations. That a monitor at a central desk miles away tracked the lifts. The square operator house? Historically significant, the clerk said, pleased with having a reason to keep a neat little building on the register. No one staffed it. No one had. Officially, in years. That would have been the end of it if not for the night the storm brushed the coast. It didn't make a meal of the place. It brought shoulders of rain and shoulders of wind, alternated in an old march cadence. The marsh went mottled and glossy. The causeway deck shone like a new penny every time the lamps came into their halos. A section crew had left a flatbed in a pullout with its beacon turning lazily. The kind of beacon that says this is nothing and something at once. A tide gauge near marker 12 clicked where it sat inside its little cage. Nadine took everything down a gear and hung steady. The CB sounded lightly like a room 2 doors over where the adults are talking, then clear as if he had sat in the passenger seat and pointed the tender's voice. 19 to southbound freight. Take the center line and keep to it. There's a step at the heel from last week. Caution, 2 cones missing. You'll climb an inch and a hair. Don't let the sound of it scare you. She rolled right up on the place, and there it was, where deck met deck at that heel corner. A proud little ridge had presented itself. Not enough to stop a person. Enough to startle them. The rain had probably swept away the chalk or paint that would have made the bump honest. Someone had intended to lay more cones there, and had not. She saw the scuff of round plastic in the fog a few yards down the cones, napping or blown on. The operator house lamp was awake, a square of steadiness in a shiver of weather. Her hazard lights made an orange space behind her that passed for impartial benevolence to anyone following. The small car from earlier had grown into a different one now, lower, a little wilder. It floated up, saw the orange, and tucked back 2 lengths without pride wounded. She crossed as instructed. The step knocked under her tires exactly once, neatly. The trailer answered in the good way, the way Steele says. "I got you." She kept her breath even, and let the rain beat its drum on the cab roof in 16th notes. Past the joint, she let the hazard lights run a few seconds more, and then eased them off. Behind her, the lower car rolled up as if to take a challenge, saw the ridge in time because of the lamp and the saltwater reflection, and took it with none of the drama it had likely been planning for itself. Its brake lights showed a small flare of humility. Then they went on like nothing had happened. She pulled into a maintenance bay on the city side and told the night watch, not like she was expressing a miracle, just like she was filing a report. He made a call, quiet but quick. A dot truck with a striped bumper and a roll of new cones appeared 20 minutes later and went the length of the causeway, placing them right. When the truck returned, the driver raised his hand to Nadine's window in thanks. "How'd you see it in that soup?" he asked, and she said, "A lamp did me a kindness, because that was both true and acceptable." He glanced at the causeway. The old operator house? Thought the power was off there. Must be a backfeed. He shook his head in professional puzzlement, and then relaxed into gratitude. Thanks for calling it. On a later run, no storm, just a tide as organized as a military band, and a wind that liked to pretend it was asleep, Nadine took the habit of stopping at the city-side pocket by the operator house. There was a little concrete pad below where the stairs used to be before they locked the door and removed the steps. On that pad, a cup sat as if someone had set it down and gone to answer a phone 10 years ago. It had no dust. It had no story to tell. She poured a bit of coffee out of her thermos into a spare paper cup and set it by the wall at the place where a door would be. It was not an offering. It was a courtesy she'd learned on a mountain once. Leave warmth for whoever might need it. She didn't wait. She walked back to her truck and went on her way. The next time she came through, a note had been tucked under a bolt on the operator house's lower panel, protected from the weather by a strip of tape as careful as a bandage. The paper looked like it had come from a pad meant for duty logs, lines, a column for time, a column for remarks. In neat pencil, Southboard lamp keeps. 3 blinks, green 4 after the bell. Tell anyone who asks, mind wet iron. Much obliged. H. H for Harold, she thought, or Henry, or just hand. She put the paper back under the tape exactly as she'd found it. Even if it had been a joke by a night crew, it was a good one, anchored in the kind of knowledge she respected. Word of the late lamp and the small ridge drifted along the road the way these things do. A driver in a diner halfway up the coast said, I heard a voice on the causeway tell me to tap twice. Thought it was someone messing on 19, but the light came on, and I'll be if it didn't help my eyes. A patrol officer who had the coastal patch on his sleeve said in a practical way that sometimes old circuits hold their idea of duty longer than anyone expects. You fix one end, he said. It wakes the other. Knight's an old electrician. By August, a crew had installed a new LED in the operator house window, small, efficient, on a real schedule. It burned every night, not bright, not dim, just right. It no longer answered a horn tap. It no longer needed to. The ridge at the joint had been ground flat and sealed. The cones took their proper naps in a nest by a fence until needed. The sign at marker 15 stood upright, paint refreshed, letters neat. The causeway looked like an elder that had had a fresh haircut. The voice on the CB didn't disappear. It changed. On clear nights when she had no need of advice, she'd hear, faint as the memory of a bell, tender at 19 to southbound Freight River calm, wind southerly. Count 3 bells if you want company. Sometimes she'd count them, not for luck, but to make rhythm for her mind. Other times she'd leave the radio low and let the frog orchestra take the solo. Once on a morning when the moon had stayed too long and a ribbon of thin cloud made a pale scar in the east, she ran the causeway just as a tug pushed a low barge through the cut. The tug gave 3 short notes and 1 long, making a pattern that wasn't in any handbook she knew. It sounded like a hello a person makes when they spot someone on a porch in the dawning. She couldn't say the tug had noticed her. She answered anyway with 2 polite taps, nobody to disturb but the egrets and a fish that thought better of jumping and stayed down. Late in the year, a new driver floated in the pocket of her lights and tried to take the draw a little hot, a little bravely. The night was clear. The deck had no tricks to play. She gently washed him with the light of her hazard for 3 breaths and then eased them off. It was instruction without words. The next town over, in a quiet lot beside a bait shop that kept its soda colder than any truck stop, the same rig parked 2 spaces down from her. The driver, young but with eyes that knew when they held something they hadn't earned yet, said thanks without weaving a story around it. She said, mind the wet iron when it rains. And he nodded like he understood the bigger shape of what she meant. On her glove box, clipped under the light where road maps used to live before the world put them in pockets, she kept 1 small rectangle of paper. The log page from the operator house. The one with H's note. She didn't take it to keep it. She took it because it had been sitting where water could have found it and, on the next pass, she pushed it back under the bolt with the same tape, the pencil line darker where she traced the words so they wouldn't wash away. She left instead a replacement. A fresh page from a safety pad from her yard. A pencil line of her own that said, in the quiet voice a person uses when not wanting to wake anyone, southbound reefer thanks you. Cones placed. Lamp keeps. Coffee left. Sometimes the night gives you a thing and asks for nothing in return. Sometimes it gives you a way to participate in keeping it gentle for whoever comes behind. The causeway taught Nadine that a marsh can hold a message and a lamp can answer a horn, even when nobody is officially at the switch. It taught her that advice spoken with care at the right moment can slide a whole chain of vehicles past an inconvenience without anyone remembering to call it by the fancy name of an AXNFTITE. Assist. She didn't put the story into the louder parts of the lot, where tails grow armor and teeth. She kept it like you keep a coin in your pocket, to remember what you owe to quiet watchfulness. On some nights, long after the LED in the operator house replaced the habit of the horn, she'd hear a fragment of that same measured voice on 19. Mind the center stripe, friend. Favor the high side. It would fade into frog song. The marsh would breathe. The causeway would hold her a few minutes more, and then hand her back to the country beyond it, where signs had different names and lights blinked a different color, and night made its other arrangements. Story number 6. Keon liked the way tunnels organized the world. Out in the open, the night could spread its arms so wide that a person felt smaller than the stripe that held their lane together. Inside a mountain, the road gathered its thoughts. Light came in measured pieces. Sound had borders. The cab became a room in a longer room, with a recipe for breathing steady, practical, unhurried. His route this month threaded 2 cities through old ridges and new cuts. The older ridges insisted on tunnels. There was a pair on the eastbound, one shorter, one long straight-backed bores with tiled walls and a line of amber lamps that always looked a little warmer than they needed to. The long one had a name he never quite said out loud. It felt like saying it would give away a secret he didn't know he had. On the signs, it wore the ordinary badge, tunnel ahead, maintain 45 headlights on radios, to 1,710 AM for advisory. He was fond of those signs. They gave instructions like someone writing a list on a kitchen pad. He tuned the AM before he reached the point where rock swallowed sky. The frequency went to life with a soft hum, and then filled with the sound of fans. After the fans came a voice, a recording, he assumed careful and plain. Attention motorists. Tunnel advisory in effect. Maintain posted speed. Keep 4 car lengths between vehicles. Use right lane unless directed left. The voice was old-fashioned in a way he couldn't name. It wasn't scratchy. It wasn't theatrical. It sounded like someone who believed in announcements. His rig settled into the approach. The road dipped a little to meet the mouth, then went level, then entered the rectangle of cut stone that framed the bore. The first 100 feet always felt like a hand across the shoulders. You're inside now. He glanced at his mirrors and watched the sky disappear in pieces. The fan noise gathered, a polite roar. Amber lights paced the ceiling, metronome steady. The tile had its own light, glossy squares stacked in satisfyingly honest rows. On the left, above a raised walkway, black numerals painted on the tile counted backward. 180, 179, 178. He didn't know if they were yards or panels. He liked counting them sometimes. They told time in a way the dash clock didn't. The AM voice resumed, seamless. Attention motorists. Wet floor possible near panel 170. 4. Maintenance water. Reduce speed slightly. Maintain lane. Keon's hands tightened by a fraction, not with fear but appreciation. He watched the numbers slide toward 174 and, when they did, he saw a shallow darkening that could have been sheen. He rolled over it and heard a soft hiss under the tires. Not much. Enough to agree that the voice had mentioned it. Fine. He kept to the right lane. He liked knowing where the edge was in a place where everything else was straight ahead. A sign above the walkway flashed an arrow. Left lane closed ahead maintenance. He signaled and eased across. The rigs behind him did the same. A neat little choreography that never got applause and didn't need any. The walkway numbers kept dropping. 142. 141. 140. The fan noise rose a step, then held. He had been through plenty of tunnels. He knew the tricks they played on a mind when it wasn't paying attention enough. Sometimes the road seemed to go uphill when it was a hair downhill and vice versa. Sometimes the lights could feel closer together the longer you watched them. Sometimes the lane lines hummed a second longer note. He welcomed them. They were all small ways for the mountain to say it was still there. The AM advisory cut back in. Attention motorists. Disabled vehicle in bay at panel 123. Use caution. Do not stop in travel lanes. The voice made it sound as simple as a grocery list. Milk. Eggs. Be polite. Keon watched the walkway numbers fall. The rig aired a little differently under him with the lane shift. He could feel the bank of the curve he'd forgotten about the tiniest nudge. At panel 127, a sign with a red cross glowed above a bay. 126, 125, 124. At 123, the bay had a car in it, a dark shape tucked as far from the lane as it could manage. Hazards blinked an honest orange. The hood was up, though that might have been habit. The car's driver wasn't visible. The bay made a frame around nothing. You don't stop in the lane. He didn't. He did what the advisory had asked. He kept the arc of his truck smooth, eyes soft, speed clean, and he gave his hazards 2 polite taps to wake anyone behind who wasn't listening to anything but themselves. The hazards on the car felt small and brave. As he passed, for one beat, the AM advisory changed its breath. The fan sound dipped, as if someone moved a hand near a mic. Then, first emergency phone at panel 120. Second at 90. Walk, do not run. Face traffic. The emergency phones, he knew, weren't there anymore. They had been replaced years ago with a 21st century solution: overhead Mayday buttons, cameras, a number to dial. The signs still hung in places, out of date by a decade. He'd noticed them and let them be. He reached the panel 120 marker and saw something else he didn't expect. A stainless steel plate on the wall with a handle under a hinged cover. It looked newish, not polished, not decayed, just there. Above it, painted in the same black hand as the numbers, a small stencil, to operator. He didn't touch it. He flowed on, taking his guess about how a person got help in a place where cell signals behaved like travelers too slowed down, got lost, sometimes tried again. At panel 116, the AM voice said, "Attention motorists. Lane closure lifted. Resume right lane if safe." Kyle obeyed, signaling. The light on the concrete joined his own. The advisory faded back into fan noise, then to silence for a count of 20. The tiles went on holding their order like they enjoyed the work. After panel 90, another stainless plate, another small stencil. His eyes clicked down to the cab radio and back up without his say-so. The voice returned, softer. If you need assistance, a short tone will sound, followed by operator response. Keep messages brief. Describe location by panel number. Help is near. It should have sounded corny. It should have sounded like a cartoon of old safety movies. Something in the steady of it made it steady in him. At panel 88, a shimmer lifted from the pipe along the wall, like heat over a road in winter when salt water makes a coat the eyes can't count. The hiss above his head changed note for 3 seconds and then returned. He breathed in time with the fan, a habit he didn't know he carried. The bay at panel 72 was empty. The one at 61 had a bucket and a cone inside it, not road cones, mop cones. The kind that warn of slip risk. He smiled at that, a domestic touch in 1,000 feet of industrial intent. The AM voice gave a final reminder. Tunnel exiting in 6,000 feet. Remove sunglasses. Do not brake for light. He didn't wear sunglasses at night, but he laughed anyway. A small sound. Outside, the mountain gave him back the sky like a door opened from a dark hall into a wide room. The stars were there doing their calm jobs. The road breathed easier. He checked his mirrors and saw the black rectangle that framed the west portal receding like the end of a story you would read again later. He didn't think of the advisory again until the return run before dawn 2 days later. The city had been busy in the way cities are busy without feeling like it. He set the nose toward the ridges and felt the world step down to night sensible. The AM advisory greeted him at the mouth, fans making a kind of ongoing organ note, the voice stepping in between phrases. Attention motorists. Work crew in left lane at panels 140 to 135. Use right lane, speed reduced. He slid right and slowed. The crew appeared in an ordered little scene that could have been a carefully built diorama, if not for the sweat and the smell of the cutting saw. Instead of flames and drama, there was white dust and the patient glow of headlamps worn on foreheads. 2 fluorescent jackets moved. One hand lifted without looking at him, a wave that meant thanks and also please do the obvious, which he did. Past the crew, the advisory took a turn it hadn't before. Call boxes at panels 120 and 90 available. He hadn't seen a call box in years, not in any tunnel. He kept his eyes open more than usual. He found the stainless plates again. The handle under the first had a small light above it. He hadn't noticed that before. It glowed a sleepily reassuring green. At panel 123, the car. The same? Maybe. A different shape, but the same feeling: hood up, hazards, someone's life paused. Keon did what experienced drivers do with minimal fuss. He eased his hazard lights on a few beats earlier this time, then feathered his speed just enough to make a safe pocket behind him. Light football for the road. The rigs behind accepted the tempo. A compact SUV had been drifting in the left lane, not from mischief, just from the tunnel's trick with distances. It slid over with mild guilt and tucked into the safer rhythm. The car in the bay kept blinking in thanks and worry. He reached panel 120. The stainless cover looked less like a relic tonight and more like a tool. He checked his mirrors clear, lane stable, and then, as gently as he would open a glove box, he guided the rig into a slow, steady roll, set the brake, and stepped down into the controlled air of the tunnel, its breath cool and the smell faintly metallic. The wall hummed under his glove. He lifted the cover. A round black speaker and a metal plunger sat inside. The printed words were simple. Press once. Wait for tone. State panel number. The idea made him feel like a picture in an instruction manual. He pressed. The fan sound shifted for a second. His ears told him that not the panel, but then a clear, bell-like tone rang in the speaker, followed by a voice he didn't expect to be so present. Operator, it said. Not tinny, not far away. Just a person in the next room. State your location by panel. Panel 120, Keon said. He kept it short. He could hear his own voice come back at him off the tile. A pleasant double that sounded like a friend agreeing with him. Disabled sedan at 123, in bay. Hazard lights on. Occupant not visible. Copy 120, the voice said. Thank you. Stay to the right. Rolling watch vehicle dispatched west to east. We'll pulse the ceiling 2 ahead of you to slow anyone coming warm. The line gave a small click and went quiet. Above him, as if directed by someone who knew how to move a crowd without being in it, the next 2 amber lights brightened, softened, brightened again. Not a flash, more like a breath. In his mirror, he saw the SUV behind him take the suggestion. He climbed back into the cab, checked the bay one more time as he rolled by, and touched his horn twice, a kind of hello to whoever was braving a tunnel with a car that had lost its morning. He rolled out. The pulse ahead faded and returned to steady. The AM advisory murmured a thank you he could have imagined, but was sure he hadn't. Motorist at panel 123. Acknowledged. Assistance. Inbound. At the west portal, night opened like a cooler door. He took the shoulder he liked for quick checks and felt his chest ease. He didn't need proof of what had just happened. Even so, when a maintenance pickup slid out of the median and moved behind him, amber beacon silent, he read that as proof enough. The pickup went by with a small nod in the mirror, and a hand raised at the exact height that meant good work without fuss. At a service plaza 20 miles on, he bought coffee that tasted like it had been waiting for him and asked the overnight cashier, who recognized too many drivers and none at all, if the tunnel still had call boxes. Thought they took those out last year, she said, counting wrappers for her report. They put in cameras, I think. If you stop, they see you. Push a button. A person speaks. You know the kind. He knew the kind. He also knew what he'd held in his hands, steel with edges dulled by 1,000 hands, a speaker with a tone that sounded like contact between people who knew the narrow places of the world and how to make them wider for each other. On the third pass that week, he didn't expect anything unusual. That is when the mountain, like a town cat, decides to have an opinion about your certainty. The advisory went silent 30 seconds longer than usual as he came in. The fans talked on. Then, attention motorists. Left lane closed at 140 to 135. Work crew present. Reduced speed. He followed the instructions and fell into the lit rhythm. Near panel 150, A sound touched the edge of the world that didn't belong to him, the echo of footsteps from the walkway. Not an emergency, not a rush, a person's pace. He glanced left and saw nothing but tile and number and the small things that collect in tunnels when people live with them. A chalk mark, a smear the color of glove grime, a bolt head that reflected light prouder than its neighbors. The footsteps passed, or his mind filed them with the fan. He went on. At panel 138, the advisory changed tone. An odd little softening, like the voice had leaned closer to the mic. Attention motorists. Be advised. Vehicle in travel lane at panel 132. Reduce speed. Do not brake suddenly. Prepare for pass-by. The phrase pass-by belonged to people who wrote manuals. It surprised him into trust. He set his hazards, placed his rig so that anyone behind would watch his choices, and counted the numbers. 134. 133. At 132, a pickup sat angled out just enough that the lane couldn't keep its usual shape. Its hazards were on. Its bed carried nothing but a spare and a newspaper that had learned to curl at the edges when it was bored. A man in a gray hoodie stood behind the rail in the bay, hands on the top like a person at a fence. He didn't wave. He lifted his chin in a way that said he saw Keon, and chose not to worry about him. Keon picked a line that left a little more room than strictly necessary, said please with the wheel and thank you when he was passed, and watched that man's face go from tight to something easy. The amber lights did their breath again 2 panels ahead. The rigs behind followed cleanly, like good dancers. When he reached panel 120 again, the stainless plate glowed its small green eye. He didn't need it, but he pressed anyway, a courtesy report. The tone came. The voice followed. Operator, panel 120. Pickup angled at 132. Driver in bay, he said. Traffic passing safe. Pulse was useful. Copy, the voice said. West escort is with him now. Thank you. Then, after the clipped part that belonged in a policy binder, a human sentence. You drive with good manners in close places. He smiled despite himself, a thing no one had to know about. Appreciate it, he said. And the line went quiet. The day came when he left that route for a different run. The long tunnel became a story in the glove box of his head with the other roads he carried. Months filed by, and then dispatch laid a line back through the ridges. He took it without special feeling, happy to see how the land had been in his absence. At the approach, the AM advisory was still there. The voice seemed different, and the same someone might have re-recorded it without removing the shape of the old phrasing. Attention motorists. Tunnel advisory in effect. Maintain posted speed. Keep 3 seconds between vehicles. It sounded like a friend who had cut their hair. Inside, the tile gleamed a fraction brighter. The numbers still counted the long way down. The stainless plates were gone, replaced by neat orange boxes mounted at chest height with a square button and an icon of a phone. The fan note had a higher layer to it. New fans, or a cleaning that made old fans think they could sing a little clearer. At panel 123, a bay held nothing but a pale outline where a bumper had rested often enough to make a ghost of itself in dust. Above panel 120, instead of a handle, a small placard read, "In case of incident, press orange call button. Assistance will answer." He put his hand on the steering wheel, the way a person touches a banister after years of using the same stair. The advisory, as he reached the midpoint, added a note he hadn't heard from the updated voice. Attention motorists. If you need a breathing mark, the walkway numbers will count you through. 1 number, 1 thought, all the way out. He laughed aloud. Couldn't help it. Someone had written that with a kind of poetry. The panel numbers ticked down. He counted them without saying anything under his breath. 40, 39, 38. The fan sang. His rig hummed. The tunnel held him like a corridor. An old house keeps for its own, no matter how many new lamps someone installs in its ceiling. At the west portal, he passed a maintenance truck parked under the arm of a camera. A worker in a yellow hard hat leaned against the rail with a tablet in his hand. He looked up as Keon rolled by and made the smallest gesture, a 2-fingered salute usually reserved for long acquaintances. Keon returned it. The man touched his ear, where a comm would sit, and then pointed gently back toward the tunnel, as if to say, "We see you. We see each other." He didn't know if that was what the gesture meant. He accepted it that way. A week later, in a truck stop off the interstate that wore its own ceiling of glass and fluorescent, he saw a public service poster tacked near the microwave. Tunnel safety, it read in the same font as the advisory, with a small drawing of an old handle call box beside a modern orange button. Underneath, a line in italics that had no business sounding like a poem did. "If you get quiet in there, we get loud for you." He stood a second, cup in hand, and let that settle. He never proved to anyone's satisfaction that he'd spoken to an operator on an old line that shouldn't have been present the week it was present. He didn't try. He carried the feeling instead that some places have a memory for assistance, and that even as the hardware changes, the habit of help keeps a kind of hour on its own. On certain nights, approaching the mouth again with a load that wanted a steady hand and a clock that gave him more time than less, he would tune 1710 a.m. early, let the fan hum find its way into the cab, and listen for the part of the advisory that was always there and always sounded like it had been written by someone who watched the walkway numbers the way a driver watches a horizon. It came, every time. "Do not brake for light. Keep your lane, one panel at a time." Good advice for tunnels, for mountains, for long weeks, good advice in an old voice that did not insist it had the last word. And sometimes only when the world had that particular hush that lives between 1 a.m. and something like hope the amber lamps inside would appear to breathe for a panel or two as he went by, a not quite pulse in width or warmth, as if remembering how they had once helped him slow someone else down. He would tap his hazards once, not to thank a light, not to thank a voice, but to thank the idea that in a tight place, someone on the other end will answer, even if the only hand you feel is the shape of your own on the wheel, following the numbers home. Story number 7. Imani ran west along a flat sweep of farmland, where irrigation pivots traced pale circles in the day, and the night made everything into a careful grid. Her trailer carried palletized paper goods, dense but obedient weight that stayed where it was put. She liked this corridor for its rhythm town field, and the way the highway's big sign sat high and square against the dark, honest letters doing an honest job. Near midnight, a green roadside box chirped as she passed her transponder, waking to talk to the way station ahead. "Propas units must obey signal." The sticker, on her windshield, reminded in tiny letters. Most nights, the unit would flash her a soft green and she'd carry on, the scale house a lit island in the corner of her eye. Tonight the unit stayed quiet. Up ahead, the big sign rose. "We station. 1 mile. Another. Closer. Open." She didn't resent it. Scales were part of the job, and this one was straightforward, wide lanes, clear arrows, a low glass window, where a person in uniform looked as much like a librarian as a cop. She signaled, let the ramp curve her away from the main line, and settled into the long approach. The scale house sat at the far end, a one-story rectangle with a flat roof and 3 bays, quiet as a library too. Sodium lights poured a warm amber over everything, turning concrete into soft beige and diesel stains into sepia circles. Imani brought her speed to a respectful crawl. A bank sign on a tall post ahead read, "Trucks, 5 miles per hour, single axle at a time." The pull of the deck brought up old muscle memory. Feather brake, square the wheel, let the first steer axle whisper onto the load cell. A scoreboard on the right showed big digits that usually spooled through 2 sets of numbers, steer axle weight, drive weight. Tonight it lit differently. The green segments made a word first. Stop. She stopped, a tire's width before the painted line. Then the board shifted again. Right rear door bar. Imani blinked, then glanced into her mirrors. The right rear door bar held the swing door shut with a latch that had felt a touch loose earlier, not loose like a problem, loose like something to check later at the next stop. She set her brake, tugged her jacket from the back of the seat, and climbed down. The night smelled like cut alfalfa, and a little bit like rain left over from a cloud that had given up. Gravel popped quietly under her boots. At the rear, she found the bar not off, not dangerously anything, just not fully seated in the latch. A bump or a polite pothole might have lifted it. She squared it, pressed it firm, heard the confident click, and gave it a tug to be certain. When she stepped back toward the cab, the board shifted. Thank you. Then, with a normal's board efficiency, pull ahead. She climbed in, drove forward a few feet, set her drives on the pads, and watched the numbers roll. 11,960. 33,780. Both fine. A printer on a stubby pole spat out a slip and a neat arm extended it toward where a driver's hand would naturally reach. That was new. She had never picked up a slip without a person sliding it through. The paper sat cool in her palm. Weight W divided by B12. 2 amperes. M Prairie Star Scales. At the bottom, a line in small print. Have a safe run. Westbound. She took the receipt for what it was, a nice touch, and eased off the scale. The light at the end of the lane turned green. No one waved her down. No one leaned from a window. The scalehouse window looked dark behind its glass, but it carried a suggestion of a lamp inside, a low square glow at a back wall. She rejoined the highway, and the night accepted her again as one of its moving parts. In a diner 2 towns later, washing down a grilled cheese with coffee most people would call strong and drivers would call fine, she mentioned the door bar to a man in a work jacket with a patch that read DOT. Good catch, he said simply, not surprised she'd stopped, not interested in making it into a story. Prairie Star runs an automatic assist at night sometimes. Sensors, cameras, it can nudge a message to the board if it sees something. We play with it in the off hours. He smiled without showing teeth. We get lonely in those booths. Technology keeps us company too. It made sense. Cameras could see what a person might miss. The board could say thank you. The world marched on. 2 nights later, the transponder stayed unhelpfully silent again, and the sign said open, so she pulled in. The ramp felt almost like a canoe slide smooth, explaining its grip in advance. As she lined up, the scoreboard lit early, green segments forming a line she hadn't seen before. In 200 feet, light film on road. It alternated with the usual 5 miles per hour. She didn't argue with the board. She kept her speed soft. In her headlights, the concrete slab ahead had the right color, but a different sheen the light film, the board warned about. Dew, maybe, lifting from warmer ground into cooler air. She let the rig roll with patience. The steer axle kissed the pad. The board said hold. She held. It ticked numbers she didn't need to memorize, printed a slip she barely needed to keep, and offered a new sentence. Southbound shoulder. Mile 314 marker down. She read it twice. This station was a few miles east of that mile marker. A downed marker wasn't an emergency. It was a thing that could confuse a tired mind. She shrugged in a way a careful person shrugs. Noted, thanks, I'll keep an eye. When she rejoined the highway and passed mile 314, a bent green blade lay half in the grass, half on the gravel. It wasn't in the lane. It looked as if someone had already dragged it farther from harm. A highway truck with a faint white bar of light moved on the horizon. She thought about the entry in a night log somewhere at Prairie Star. 314 marker leaning advised. The thought gave her a strange comfort, like remembering someone had turned off the porch light. The 3rd time she came through, the lanes in front of the bay were empty, and a single orange cone sat, misplaced, on the painted number in the middle of lane 2. The scoreboard started early again. Lane 1 please. Lane 1 arrowed her to the left of the cone. She rolled up and stopped where the board told her. It offered its thanks and the number set. She took the slip more thoughtfully this time. At the bottom, in even smaller print than before, a different line. Westbound Imani watch for crosswinds beyond 288. The name made her sit a second. Her transponder could carry her call sign. A way station could know more than the average sign. It wasn't magic. It was an ecosystem built to nudge trucks toward better choices. Beyond 288, a quick wind shouldered the rig for a moment. Not meanly, not out of nowhere. She eased the wheel into it, let it by, and the trailer's big rectangle cut through the gust like a polite ship through chop. She liked that somebody with a screen or a program with a memory had thought to tell her. On a Friday with a crescent moon riding low over silos and a night that felt like someone breathed on a mirror and then drew a line through the fog with their finger, Prairie Star lived up ahead with its amber sleeves rolled. Open read the sign. Steady. She rolled in, not yet thinking of it as anything but a common courtesy with perks. The scoreboard lit. Distance check. 3 dots walked left to right on the LEDs, as if the board were pacing. She held position with a gentle foot. A pause. Then, Left rear trailer light dim. She'd replaced that assembly 2 months ago. She hadn't noticed anything off, but that was the point. She slid the brake, stepped down, and walked the length of the trailer. The left rear taillight glowed, but a faint crescent at the top looked like a thin coat of dust had made a shade where it shouldn't. She brushed it with her sleeve. Oily grit came away, and the light breathed a touch brighter. Not a citation problem, a courtesy problem. The scoreboard stood by in perfect patience. When she climbed back in, it offered a new set of letters. All set. Inside the scale house, above the dark window, a small television flickered in gray-blue. She couldn't see the screen, just the shape of light. Behind that, further back, a shape like a corkboard leaned against a wall. The door didn't open. No one leaned out. The printer arm slid its paper forward at just the right height. She rolled out, a small smile in her jaw muscles she didn't broadcast. In a truck stop 2 hours on, a driver with a baseball cap that had lived on, his head long enough to be a member of the family, said, "Prairie Star? Good place. My uncle worked there. Wrote notes to drivers on the old board during storms. Check the spray on your wheels if it stops. Your icing, stuff like that. We hated it at the time, thought he was telling us how to think. He was telling us how to stay." The next week, the transponder gave her green miles away, but the big sign still said open. Habit tugged her toward the ramp. She took it. The board woke like it had been waiting. Low bridge lights dim bay 2 closed, it said first. Then, as she rolled onto the pad, hold for advisory. She held. A 2-tone beep sounded somewhere inside the scale house, not in her cab. The tiny window glowed for an instant brighter, and then returned to its gray blue. The board wrote in its square letters, a little more slowly, as if the person punching in the message was thinking every word through. "Ole on right lane at exit, 297 ramp. Use center. Gentle brake." The words were almost too fussy for the board's format. The meaning wasn't. She went back out into the stream, wrote the advice in her memory, and, 10 miles later, when the exit's right lane showed a dark patch willing to be slick if asked, she kept left and watched a small car behind her consider, reconsider, and take her lead. No skid, no drama. The car's driver held 2 hands on their wheel and, perhaps unknowingly, put 1 foot to the test of being careful without making a song of it. She tried not to personify the station after that, but the habit formed anyway, the feeling of being checked in on by a building that, at night, had more ears than mouths, and chose to use the one it had in ways that helped. She stopped by in daylight on a layover once, curious to see the other side of the same set. Prairie Star didn't shine under noon. It squinted. The amber lamps were off and looked smaller, the scale house glass dull. A single car with a state decal sat in the staff lot. A bulletin board inside the lobby, visible through another glass, held notices printed on paper as serious as taxes, hours, procedures, tire requirements winter season. A laminated sheet by the window read, "After hours contact call." A man in a green shirt stood, scratched his chin, and talked into a handheld. He looked like he would be happier with a wrench outside than with a pen inside. She left him to his shift and went on, not wanting daylight to overwrite night's quieter version. The oddest night with Prairie Star began without it. The transponder beeped green and the big sign said closed, so she stayed on the main line, not curious enough to break a rule for a place she had decided was benevolent, but also something to respect. 1 mile beyond the ramp, the highway's big overhead sign flashed in the simple DOT font that makes no attempt at charm. Left lane blocked ahead. Reduce speed. She did. Traffic slowed. A 3-car tangle, minor, stood angled like a hasty sketch on the left shoulder. Everyone involved had lights and arms and phones. She moved right and gave the scene air. A minute later, the same overhead sign changed. Check load West Wind Building. That was timely. Then, call home. If safe. She laughed out loud at that, because no overhead sign said such things. She looked again. The words had shifted back to the usual next services 24 miles. She'd misread, or wanted to see something. The night was the kind that made a person susceptible. A soft dome of dark, a long, even ribbon of road. She pulled in at the next safe shoulder and walked her strapline anyway. The west wind was indeed building. The straps hummed an extra half-tune. Everything was tight. The action did what actions do, gave her mind something to hold that wasn't whether she'd seen a message meant for someone else or for nobody at all. The following night, Prairie Star was open again. The board greeted her with its square civility. Welcome westbound. Hold. She listened to her tires breathe on the concrete. The board flicked to a note that wore a little gentleness she'd only imagined before. Tires hum right. Check for tread chip at bay optional. She rolled forward and decided optional could bear 5 minutes. The bay light flickered to life at the end of the lane. A small cart with a flip-up lid sat by the curb. Under the lid, a tire gauge, an air hose, a rag. On the rag, in marker, a message in the tidy hand of someone who writes block letters like they mean it. Clean tread check for stone. She ran her palm around the rightmost steer and found a chip no bigger than a seed lodged where it could grow into something a person would call a problem if left there. She plucked it, left it in her palm like a sesame, flicked it into a trash can, wiped her hand with the rag, closed the lid, and put the rag exactly back where it had been. On her way to the cab, the board said with the emotional reserve of a good neighbor, "Nice catch." After that, she didn't need Prairie Star to be anything other than what it was. A place that used its working pieces to care. A scale and a board and a printer and some small human choices threaded through. Of course, there was one night when she needed it, and it did the thing that made it feel like more than a stack of sensors. A cold front walked in early, the kind that shows up with a polite cough and then settles in the good chair. The temperature fell a notch. Your breath counted. The highway lost a degree of its friction where low spots held a glaze uncommon for this time of year. The sign said open. The transponder, unbothered, stayed silent. She took the ramp. The board told her to stop. It printed her slip. Then it did something she hadn't seen. It shifted to red and held there, not warning, not scolding, insisting. Red light stop. She stopped a tire width before the paint. In her mirror, a sedan came down the ramp too hot for physics and decided all at once to be a smaller car than it had been before. It skated, kissed the low concrete lip, corrected in that unhelpful way panic corrects, then righted itself 6 feet from her bumper. The driver's mouth formed a speech that included apology and surprise, and an assessment of the word ice. She put her hazards on and kept them on until the young person in the sedan found their breath. Behind them, the board lifted from red to yellow, ramp icy. Slow. It lit the message on the second lane too. The next 2 rigs came in with the caution that lives in a foot when a driver recognizes a different season under their tires. No one hit anything. The sedan turned sheepish and found a spot near the curb to sit with its heater on while hands calmed. The board returned to green with a dignity that didn't feel proud, just relieved. After, in a lot where coffee tasted like forgiveness and pastries came in generous rectangles of sugar and tenderness, a driver with a gray ponytail and a vest that had more glow than his truck's new paint said, "Prairie's got a night program. Smart folks built it. Smarter folks let it run. There's a guy who coded half of it who used to run doubles. He knows how to say a thing in 3 words that a driver will actually hear. That's the trick." She asked if anyone staffed it at midnight. He shrugged. Yes and no. Somebody's always on somewhere. The board is the mouth. That's enough. On a late Sunday swing, with the fields on either side of the highway square and dark, and waiting for spring to give them permission, she pulled in and found the station dark in a different way. The lamps were off because no one had told them to be on. The sign said closed. The scoreboard slept. A paper sign had been taped to the glass door. Temporary construction. Upgrade in progress. Night program. Suspended. She felt the ordinary sadness of a thing that has been useful being absent. It had no drama. It was the feeling you have when your favorite small bridge is out for repair. Weeks later, open again. The amber lights looked a shade newer. The board still used the square letters, but the segments were crisper. She rolled on and waited to see whether the station remembered her, which was a ridiculous way to think about a building. The board lit. "Good to see you, westbound." It was a phrase anyone could have programmed in. It still got her. The printer offered a slip, and tucked behind it, a small card like a library checkout pocket. In printed type, Prairie Star Notes. In smaller, italic letters beneath. Quiet help is still help. Someone had leaned a pencil in a little tray at the base of the printer, sharpened to that point a person gets when they care. A new sign on the call box read, "To report road conditions, press and speak clearly." She didn't press it. She drove. Past mile 314, the marker stood straight on its new post. Beyond 288, the wind behaved. At exit 297, the right lane was clean and dry. On the west ramp down the road, someone had set a cone where a patch of oil had been a month before, not because it was still slick, but because the memory of slick had burned itself into one person's mind, enough to make them want a bright reminder for the next. She carried on. The scale house became, again, a place to stop because a light told her to, and because the board sometimes said what she needed before she knew to ask, "Check pin," or "Fire ahead clear shoulder left," or "Thanks for lights," when she held her hazards one breath longer than the chart in her head insisted. Once, on a golden evening when the sky did the soft gradient, from copper to violet, that painters have chased forever, she saw a child's drawing taped up behind the glass. A truck, with eyes for headlights and a smile for a grill. Underneath, in big letters, a comment written by a hand that didn't know it would matter to a stranger. "My dad helps the road at night." She believed it. She let the thought ride with her through the wide dark, over the bridges with clean edges, past the fields holding their rows like disciplined students, all the way to a lit alley behind a distribution center, where a person with a clipboard and a mild grin said, "Back into 4 if you would." Prairie Star didn't ask to be mythical. It didn't ask to be believed in. It seemed content to be a set of lamps, a board, a printer, a lane, a handful of tools under a lid, and a group of nights where people made decisions that kept other people from having to make worse ones. If it had an eerie side, it was in the way the board would sometimes know the thing a driver was about to notice and say it first, a half step that kept a hand light and a foot ready. On certain quiet passes, it would put up nothing but 2 words as she rolled slowly by, "Easy, please." And she would, because the way through the night is 1,000 small easies, and the scales could count them like miles even if no one wrote them down. Story number 8. Tess had hauled across deserts and through cities that never slept, but winter north of the timberline taught a different discipline. The road became a season-long agreement between people and water. A string of spruce boughs stuck upright in drilled holes marked the way. A small shack at shore's edge plywood, a stovepipe, a thermometer hung outside like a punctuation mark, counted trucks on and trucks off. The lake was wide enough to make its own weather. The wind would cross it and forget the rules it had learned on land. She took the ice road for the quiet. The freight that night was practical boxed staples and a pallet of belts for a mill tight on the deck. Strapped in a grid she could read with her hands. The air bit in an honest way, cheek stinging, nose prickling, the sort of cold that made a person's breath look like it had a short opinion. In the shack, the attendant in a knit cap slid a ledger across the counter. Tess signed her name in the neat column that said outbound 2340 and tapped the posted rules with her gloved finger as if greeting an old friend. No stopping on the main line. Keep speed under 25. Do not tailgate. If the ice sings, keep your tempo and your steering straight. If you need to slow, do it gently, as if someone sleeping were in the bunk. The lake breathed in the dark. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't silent. It sounded like a chorus of low voices far away, a settling of the big sheet under the day's weight and the night's cooler hand. Tess checked everything twice. Straps, trailer, light bar, the small prayer of any driver before a committed stretch, and eased out onto the first 100 yards of roughened approach. Snow made a skin over the ice. The plow crew had cut the road like a ribbon, 2 lanes wide, compacted just enough to tell tires where to go. Spruce boughs marked the edges every 30 paces, dark green against white, a line of small guardians. Someone had tied bits of reflective tape to a few, the sort that caught a headlight and threw it back without drama. 25 felt both cautious and purposeful. She could feel, in her bones, what she'd been taught about speed on ice, how a wave could form under the skin of it if a driver was careless, how the wave could travel ahead and make mischief at the next ridge, if not treated with respect. The truck hummed the agreeable note it made at that speed. Her hands rested light on the wheel, ready without telling anyone. The first oddness arrived like a hint. A sound reached up through the floorboards. Not a crack, not a report, not a thing to make a person sweat. It was a deep, single drum beat, spaced like the count of a calm heart. The ice had a language. It told her it was alive and working. She let the sound pass through her. She did not argue with it by changing pace. The spruce boughs ticked by in even time, a metronome a person could trust. Halfway to the first portage island, a low ground fog gathered. It rose from the ice in freckles, small, personal, as if every patch of lake had its own thoughts. The lamps on her bumper turned into halos. The sky had no stars, not because clouds had won thin ice crystals hung in the air. A million tiny surfaces deciding to become a ceiling. Ahead, in the faintest distance, columns of light rose from the far shore, vertical smears that looked like someone had drawn with a new pencil and then lightly erased. She had seen light pillars once by a refinery and knew the physics well enough to assign them a name. A person could still feel the first bite of awe that drew old stories into being. An eyebrow's width of unease sat behind her ear and then settled when the pillars changed as her speed paced the air. At the first island, the road lifted a dozen feet to rounded land spotted with scrub. The portage made a stop, allowed a pullover widened by a plow, a sign set in a snowbank. Breathing, mark. Tess eased in, kept the engine running as the rule said, checked her straps with gloved fingers, and turned in a slow circle to feel the air. The spruce bough at the end of the turnout wore a strip of blue cloth knotted with tidy intent. Someone had tied it there recently. In the shack, she'd seen a page with the same cloth taped to it, a code the crews used when a ridge ahead had developed. Blue, meaning, watch for pressure. From the island edge, she looked back. Her tracks crossed a smooth page of snow the way a careful hand draws a line without pressing too hard. Out on the flat, the ground fog moved in a slow version of wind, a hush with weight. Farther out, the pillars tapered up again and became thinner, taller, lined along the far shore like a picket fence of light. She took her hands off the rail she'd found and returned to the cab. The lake returned the truck's weight with a low syllable, a welcome or a note taken. The second leg ran longer and across the lake's center, where sound behaved like it had been given to an organist. The ice sang differently here, not louder, not more interesting, just a different key. The rules asked for spacing. The radio channel reserved for the road low power, only for check-in and emergencies, clicked occasionally with a driver giving a panel number, a mile marker the ice crews trusted. The voices kept it plain. No one made jokes. No one told long stories. Tess preferred it that way here. The fans and chatter of the open road had their miles. This stretch belonged to the sheet and its voice. She cleared a set of spruce boughs bent over by wind. The next pair stood straighter. She noted the tiniest tilt in the one on the right. The way a person notes a picture hung a degree off level. She pressed that fact into the part of her mind that held one road's quiet information. Ahead, a white ridge bulged like the seam where a stitched bag turns full. Pressure had pushed ice up and over itself. The crews had carved a gentle ramp through it where the ridged ice bowed to necessity. Signs on sticks written in black marker told their practical poem, ramp, first gear, no stop. The incline was not dramatic. Her truck took it like a step. On the crest, she heard 3 small notes, a trio of quick, high pings like a kettle cooling. They were not warnings. They were a song of metal acknowledging cold. Through the fog, a red pinpoint appeared off to her left, and then stayed where it was relative to her. Lantern, she thought. One of the old kerosene kinds hung by the crews. You could make choices by those, in a pinch, when battery lights decided they wanted a different job. The pinprick paused long enough for her to wonder whether it belonged to this season or another. When she matched the tree line ahead and the pinprick's position remained sensible for the angle of the far shore, she let the thought go. The ice made room for superstition in some people and patience in others. She carried the second. Past the ridge, the road narrowed into a run that crossed a wide black seam inside the snow's smooth. Not water, nothing that required panic or even a change in pace. Lake ice can be clear in places and look black where snow has been swept free. The seam moved under her like polished wood under a hand. The truck's hum slid a note lower. The ice under it gave back the same string pluck it had offered at the start, a reassuring sound because it was the same. On her right, Halfway between the spruce boughs and the little wall of wind-carved snow, something sat on the ice, small, squarish, not quite a box. She would have driven past it untouched, if not for the rule that allowed stops only at the portage. At the next island, she pulled in and took the turn slow. On the inside edge of the turnout, a neat row of sandbags rested, placed by a hand that knew how to set weight without wasting it. She left the engine purring, grabbed her flashlight, and walked back along the packed path the plow had defined, curiosity put on a leash. On the outside of the turn, sitting where wise people sometimes leave small things for those who come, someone had set a shovel in a snowbank and a tin box on a stand. The box contained road salt in a plastic scoop, and a note in clear, sharp handwriting. If your tires polish the ramp, dress it. A kindness for the next. She laughed softly into her scarf and scooped a modest amount onto the ramp she'd just climbed, knowing how much not to take. As she did, a sound from the lake called her attention 10 paces down the main line. A deep pop, not like a balloon, like a log adjusting in a fire, an old housewood beam shifting its long weight. She didn't step toward it. She looked. The sound passed. The surface ahead did not move. She finished, closed the tin, bumped the shovel's handle into the bank to keep it from sliding on an unseen tilt, and returned to the cab with a warmth that didn't come from the heat vents. The middle of the lake was always the most honest. No trees, no edges, nothing to hide behind. That's where the next strangeness came. In the mirror, the driver's side 1-2 faint points of light appeared far behind. They did not rise or fall. They did not sway with shape. They tracked exactly with her. They were too low for a cab, too steady for a person, too far to be anything you could bet money on. She watched them for a lane's worth, then two. When her speed dropped a breath to match a small sway in the wind, the points mirrored her change. No sound followed, no engine, no whistle of tires over packed snow. Just the far sound of the lake doing what lakes do. She didn't accelerate to test them. She restored her original tempo and watched them fade a centimeter's worth in the glass. At the next island, she coasted into the turnout exactly as she had before, the engine giving its comfortable idle, and turned the mirror with a gloved finger to search the road behind, like she had eyes that could throw farther than physics allowed. The points were gone. The pillars on the far shore lifted a little in the light of a town she wouldn't see until morning. She left the mirror where she found it and kept going. Some things on the ice tried to act like company. A person could let them and still be fine. A law of the lake said the last ridge before shore would protest. It groused where shallow water under it met the big plate moving with the cold, bumping up into something like a frozen shrug. The crews always had a plan for it. Blue flags on high sticks, an arrow made of boughs laid flat, a notch cut smooth as a kitchen stepped down into a section where the ice had reached a truce with itself. She came to it ready. The signs were out, lettered in the same careful black hand. A piece of duct tape held one corner of one sign that didn't want to face the way the wind had chosen. As her steer tires crested the small cut, a thin tone sounded in the cab. She glanced at the dash. Not the seatbelt chime, she'd set that off by accident enough times to know the note. Not the temperature alarm for the bunk. It was softer, cleaner, a single note, and then nothing. The trailer eased down the notch. The ice under it hummed a hair differently, then returned. She reached land. The road climbed to the second shack, twin to the first, the ledger waiting with its other column. Inbound 122. The attendant, different hat, same eyes of someone who knew nights, slid his pencil and said, "How's it singing out there?" He didn't ask if she'd heard anything else. She nodded like a person nods when asked about the weather by another person who lives under the same weather. "Low," she said, in step. She made delivery at a yard full of parked equipment wearing white coats and a loader operator who waved without looking up from what he was doing. The night had a little color at the edge, by then Aurora deciding whether to speak. She allowed herself a longer sit than schedule insisted, a thermos cup of heat and a minute to let the truck relax into its clamps. On the way back to the shack for the return sign out, a bulletin board caught her photos from summers past. People in t-shirts posed next to a row of spruce boughs stacked and ready, smiling the way people do when they see the bones of a road. A laminated card with capital letters reminded, "Do not stop on the main line." The line below had been written by hand, and then laminated too. "If you must stop. Find land. Find people. Find quiet. and then go. On the return trip, the pillars hid and then grew, and then turned into something else. Faint horizontal bands like a fence built by a patient hand between world and world. The ice sang a bar different on the way back. The spruce boughs nodded in a slightly new rhythm. The red pinpoint that had kept her company on the outbound sat lower, closer to the surface, as if someone had set the lantern on the ice while they tied a scarf over their nose. She did not go looking for it. She didn't need it. Halfway back, as the road threaded two wooden stakes high enough to be seen if drift took half the lane, the lights behind her returned a pair so polite, she almost forgot about them. She checked the radio channel to make sure she hadn't missed anyone calling the midpoint. It was quiet. She glanced again and saw something she hadn't earlier. Above the twin dots, faint and tall, two ghostly columns rose. Not headlights. Not a vehicle. Light pillars formed by her own markers, a trick of angle and cold. Her lights were painting the air, and the painting was following. She let out the small laugh people make when a riddle allows you in on its smallest secret. The dots rose as she climbed the next gentle up. She felt less alone and knew she wasn't actually accompanied and held both truths without them having to fight. Near the portage where she'd salted the ramp, a glove sat on the edge of a spruce bough, the modern kind with reflective piping and a wrist tab, palm up like it had been left to carry snow. She slowed while still on land, took it, and squeezed the inside where a person might write their name. Someone had, in indelible marker, Team 3, on the wrist tab, smaller letters, sound carries. She placed it back on the bough, fingers tucked so it wouldn't take the wind's invitation, a talisman that needed to be where it had been chosen to sit. In the last third of the crossing, the ice offered one long note, held, like a singer proving breath control. Tess kept her speed as posted. The sound wasn't drama. It was the world saying that it remembered its work. When the note released, she exhaled with it, not because she'd been holding her breath, but because it felt polite to answer. At the near shore, the first shack's stove gave off a breath of wood smoke that took her right back to a childhood of bonfires and wet mittens steaming on a chairback. She signed in, inbound 39, and let the attendant make the same eyes and chin question. "Good shape?" they asked. Tess nodded. "Blue flags at the last ridge," she said. Lanterns set left, columns before the far town, singing on the low side. The attendant made a check mark in the column labeled Notes, with a pencil point, sharp enough to make a point, without tearing the paper. "Thank you kindly," they said. Not like it was a ritual, but like it was craft. She parked in the plowed lot where trucks that had done a night well would cool before day took over. The cold popped a little at the corners of things. The aurora drew a soft green curtain the way a person draws the sheet up to just the right place. She slept with a kind of ease that had nothing to do with exhaustion, and everything to do with having done a thing in its proper tempo. By afternoon, the ledger showed a line of names that fit neatly in the space people went, and came and put their initials under the idea that the road would be there when called upon, and go away when the season was done. She was handed, as she left, a small card printed with "Rules don't stop, don't speed, don't chase the person in front," and a handwritten addition at the bottom. "If you hear it sing, that's the ice telling you it's listening. Say what you need to say by how you keep your pace." She returned to her usual corridor the following week, dry pavement, wind that played well with mirrors, signs that told you how far to coffee. On certain nights when the road hummed at that exact measure 25, unhurried on a service road or through a yard, she'd hear the lake again, not as a sound but as a shape of attention. She'd keep her hands as steady as they had been out on the white, and sometimes, for a breath, a pair of faint light pillars would rise in the hem of the sky above an industrial park or a town's orange glow. She didn't follow them. She didn't need to. She took them as a nod from a place that had its own rules and appreciated when someone kept them. There are terrifying stories about ice roads that people tell in rooms too warm for the telling. Those weren't hers. Hers belonged to ledger lines, spruce boughs tied with tape, a tin of salt on a stand, a glove that knew enough to say "sound carries," a drumbeat under the floorboards that never sped up when she didn't ask it to. She drove on with a kind of calm that felt like carrying a careful light in a wind. Long after the season closed and the boughs lay in a neat pile under sun and mosquito, when the wind found steel bridge rails on far interstates and played a tune across them, she'd catch herself matching her breath to the lake's old tempo. A truck doesn't forget the roads that taught it. Neither does the person, hands steady, eyes soft, counting a line of guardians 30 paces apart, following them out and back, as if the distance between them were measures